Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. What you're about to read isn't just another spooky story. Some believe it's rooted in something far more real, leaked details from a classified program, fragments of truth that were never meant to surface. Tonight, we slip into the shadows of hidden experiments and the fragile boundary between worlds. Daniel Cross jerked upright in bed, heart pounding like a drum. His sheets were soaked and twisted around his legs, clinging to him like restraints. It was that dream again. Only this time, it had felt more real, almost too real. He could still see it in flashes, the dim underground tunnels washed in a flickering blue light, the cold metal chair at the center of the room, leather straps biting into his wrists, and the voices, always those sterile, emotionless voices echoing through concrete halls. Subject 17 demonstrates exceptional receptivity, increased neural amplitude by 30%. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, trying to shake the lingering images. His room was dark and quiet, except for the television, which buzzed softly with static. But he knew he'd turned it off before bed. He stared at the screen. The grey snow of static danced like ash in a storm, and beneath it all, he could hear something. A low hum, a sequence of tones just outside the range of normal hearing. It tugged at him, subtly but insistently, like fingers tapping on a door deep in his brain. Drawn like a moth, Daniel stumbled toward the screen. In the chaos of white noise, strange shapes began to form. Not random, no. Geometric patterns emerged, symmetrical and impossibly precise. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, but something felt wrong. It wasn't quite his face. The eyes, they weren't his. He didn't realize he was speaking until the words were already in the air. Delta Protocol 17. Initiate phase bend. As the phrase left his lips, the static roared, and the hum climbed into a piercing whine that made his jaw ache. His fillings buzzed. Then, silence. The screen went black. Daniel stood frozen, body trembling, tears silently running down his cheeks. He didn't know why he was crying. By morning, he chalked it up to a nightmare, a freak hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But as he brushed his teeth, he noticed something odd in the mirror. Behind his ear, just below the hairline, was a small red mark. A perfect circle, like a puncture wound that had fully healed. He didn't remember ever getting it. The days passed, and the dreams only deepened. More intense, more detailed, always the same. The hidden facility, the clinical faces of scientists in white coats, the icy metal chair with its tight restraints. They ran tests, dozens of them, pushing his mind past its limits, over and over. Strangely, in the dreams, he was younger, a child again, maybe 11, maybe 12. His limbs smaller, his voice thinner. But the setting never changed, and always, in the background, that same landmark loomed, a massive radar tower silhouetted against a dusky sky. It became an obsession. When Daniel wasn't at his job coding security systems for a defense contractor, he was sketching the tower, first on napkins, then on notepads, then across the pages of notebooks. Eventually, the walls of his apartment were plastered with his drawings, the tower from different angles, the coastline behind it, and strange symbols, spirals, interlocking, lines, characters he didn't recognize drawn with an almost involuntary hand. It was his co-worker, Martin, who first noticed something was off. "Dan, man, you look like hell," Martin said one afternoon as they sat down for lunch. Daniel blinked, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah, just haven't been sleeping." "Bad dreams?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Weird ones. Always the same. A testing facility, a radar tower near the ocean. Martin paused, his plastic fork frozen halfway to his mouth. What kind of tower? Daniel didn't have to think. FPS 35, Cold War era, huge structure with a cone-shaped top. I can even hear the wind around it. Martin slowly set his fork down. That's oddly specific, especially for a dream. I know, Daniel murmured, then quieter. And there's something else. When the TV goes to static, I hear sounds, like a signal. Martin leaned forward, frowning. What kind of signal? It doesn't say anything. It's not a voice. It's more like a beacon, calling to me. Martin was quiet for a moment, eyes searching Daniel's face. You ever hear of Camp Hero out in Montauk? The name hit Daniel like a current. Every hair on his body stood up. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. Jesus, Dan, you okay? Daniel didn't respond at first. His lips barely moved. I need to go there. Go where? He was already staring past the cafeteria walls. Montauk. The drive to Long Island took just over 4 hours. But to Daniel, it felt like going home. Like returning to a place he hadn't been in decades, though he couldn't say when he'd ever been there at all. As he entered Montauk Township, something shifted. A pressure bloomed behind his eyes. Not quite pain, more like the build-up before a sneeze that never comes. A silent insistence. The trees grew thicker. The roads narrowed. The pine forest on either side of him pressed in, like the land itself was holding its breath. Daniel's GPS flickered and died. Twice. But he didn't need it. His hands moved on their own, as though guided by some buried instinct. Every turn felt familiar. Every fork in the road was met with a certainty he couldn't explain. The forest thinned, replaced by open scrubland, and then, like stepping into a memory, the Atlantic came into view, endless and cold under a pale blue sky. And there it was. The radar tower, exactly as he'd drawn it 100 times, its massive, dish-shaped silhouette jutting out from the earth like some ancient relic. It loomed above the decaying sprawl of Camp Hero, an old Air Force base designed for a war that never came. Concrete bunkers, angular structures half swallowed by time, scattered across the ground like broken chess pieces. A rusted sign at the entrance read, Camp Hero State Park. But something about the scene felt off. The chain-link perimeter fence looked too fresh, too well-maintained. The cameras perched at intervals along the fence weren't relics. They were modern, quietly blinking. Daniel parked in the nearly empty lot. Gravel crunched beneath his boots as he made his way to the visitor center, a squat military building repurposed with little effort. Faded green paint peeled from the siding. Inside, the air smelled faintly of mildew and paper. A park ranger sat behind the front desk, hunched over a crossword puzzle. She didn't look up as the door creaked open. Closing in an hour, she said flatly, still scribbling with her pencil. I was wondering, Daniel began, trying to sound casual despite the pounding in his chest. What can you tell me about the history of this place? The ranger exhaled slowly and slid a folded pamphlet across the counter. Cold War radar, station, decommissioned early 70s, self-guided tour maps in there. Stick to the trails. Daniel nodded but didn't take the pamphlet. What about the underground sections? Her pencil stopped mid-letter. She finally looked up at him, her gaze narrowing. There aren't any underground sections open to the public. But they exist, don't they? Her eyes studied him a moment longer. Look, mister, this is just an old military site. If you're one of those YouTube conspiracy guys, I've been here before, Daniel said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. When I was a kid. Not possible, she snapped. This place was sealed military property until 1992. Daniel leaned in, voice low. What about the Montauk Project? For a second, the room felt colder. The ranger stiffened. Her face shifted from annoyance to something harder, unreadable. Slowly, she set her pencil down and reached for the landline phone on her desk. "The park's closing early today," she said. "You need to leave." "I just have a few more questions," Daniel said quickly. Her finger hovered over the keypad. "Or I call security." Daniel backed away, his palms sweating. He took the pamphlet she'd offered and stepped outside, into the bright afternoon, heart racing. As he started his car, a black SUV turned into the lot, moving slow. It had government plates. The passenger, bald, in dark sunglasses, raised a phone and snapped a photo of Daniel's license plate. He didn't drive away. Not yet. Instead, he circled down to the public beach that bordered the park. He left his car in a small lot near the dunes and followed a trail that wound along the bluffs overlooking the sea. The wind was sharp here, salt stinging his skin. High above the tree line, the radar tower was still visible, unmoving, watching. Eventually, he reached a chain-link fence running along the bluff's edge. It was old, rusted in places, but something inside him stirred. He paused, staring at it. His rational mind told him this was his first time here. But somewhere deeper, he recognized every bend in the wire, every rusted post. He turned left and walked 20 yards, already knowing what he would find. A section of fence had been replaced. Newer metal, less corrosion. It had once been cut through, he was sure of it. Evening was coming fast, the sun dragging long shadows across the coastline. Daniel found a spot where the edge of the bluff had collapsed, forming a crude sloping path down to a narrow beach. The base's old concrete seawall ran along this part of the shore, stained with salt, chipped from time, covered in graffiti and moss. Daniel ran his fingers along its rough surface, eyes scanning for something. Then he felt it. An indentation, half buried under grime. He brushed away sand and grit to reveal a rusted metal panel. It looked like an old electrical box, but the lock was missing. He hesitated only a second before typing in the numbers that had haunted his mind for weeks. 135. Nothing. Still nothing. He paused, hand shaking slightly, then entered 8153. A low, grinding sound rumbled from inside the wall. Concrete groaned. A panel, once indistinguishable from the rest of the wall, shifted inward, then slowly swung open. Hinges creaked in protest. Behind it, a narrow tunnel yawned open, disappearing into pitch black. A sharp odor hit him, mildew, damp concrete, and something synthetic, chemical. The scent triggered a wave of nausea and memory. He turned on his phone's flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel sloped downward. Smooth concrete gave way to rough-hewn stone slick with moisture, like the inside of a tomb carved into the earth. The walls seemed to breathe around him. Every step echoed strangely, as if the space was remembering his presence. Daniel moved slowly through the damp tunnel, his footsteps echoing softly off the concrete walls. He wasn't following the flashlight so much as something deeper, a flicker of memory buried in the folds of his mind. Around 50 yards in, the narrow passage opened up into a larger space. It looked like an old maintenance room, long since forgotten. Rusted pipes snaked along the walls, and broken shelves leaned awkwardly against each other, half collapsed under their own weight. The air smelled of mildew, oil, and something older, like dust and time. But Daniel knew this room hadn't always been used for tools and storage. He didn't remember how he knew. It was like a whisper from another life. He turned his light toward the far wall. A thick metal door hung ajar, just enough for blackness to pour out from the gap. It wasn't ordinary darkness. It seemed to drink in the light from his flashlight, devouring it. He stepped closer. As he neared the threshold, a sudden wave of dizziness knocked the breath from his chest. His knees buckled, and his vision blurred. Then, images. Sharp, broken flashes like shards of glass. Children in thin hospital gowns, terrified eyes. Men in lab coats scribbling on clipboards. A massive metallic chair ringed with blinking lights and humming cables. And tests. Endless, inescapable tests. Voices echoed in his head. Focus on the light, Daniel. Tell us what you see through the gateway. His hand went numb. The phone slipped from his grip and hit the ground with a sharp clatter. He collapsed next to it, unable to move. Just before the world went black, he saw it, etched crudely into the door's surface, a triangle intersecting a perfect circle, scratched deep into the corroded metal. Then, nothing. When Daniel opened his eyes again, he was lying on wet sand. Waves lapped gently at his feet. The sky above was a sheet of indigo, pricked with stars. The sun had long since vanished beneath the horizon. He sat up, soaked to the bone in seawater, but with no memory of ever going into the ocean. His phone was gone. He turned toward the seawall, and his stomach dropped. The entrance was gone. Not just sealed or hidden, gone. The wall was smooth and unbroken, as if the tunnel had never existed at all. Daniel pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. His head ached, and his thoughts felt scrambled. He checked his watch. 9:02 p.m., but then he saw the date. 3 days had passed. The drive back to Connecticut felt unreal. His hands gripped the steering wheel, but it was like he was watching himself, from outside his own body. Headlights swept over empty roads. He didn't remember the turns he made. The radio was off, but strange fragments of memory buzzed in his skull, louder than any music. He remembered the chair. They had called it the Montauk chair, a grotesque fusion of alien tech and human invention, cobbled together with parts salvaged from God knows where. Tesla's fingerprints were all over it, in the theories and wiring, and he remembered how it felt when they switched it on. The sensation of being peeled open. His consciousness stretched and pulled through some invisible membrane, yanked into a space that wasn't meant for minds like his. And worst of all, he remembered what they made him do with it. Back at his apartment, he couldn't sleep, couldn't sit still. He paced until dawn, scribbling madly into an old notebook. Names, flashes of dialogue, half-remembered blueprints, Dr. Marcus Bennett. Cold, sharp features, even colder eyes. Cameron Hayes, always reeking of smoke and cheap, cologne, gruff military bark. Preston Nichols, the technician who didn't belong, nervous, kind in small ways, gave the kids candy when no one was looking. Preston Nichols. That name stuck in Daniel's mind like a thorn. There was something about it, something important. As soon as the library opened, Daniel was there. His hair was still damp, clothes thrown on in a rush. He asked the sleepy-eyed librarian if they had anything on the Montauk Project. She raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, simply pointed him to the small conspiracy section. There it was, sandwiched between battered volumes on Roswell and MK Ultra, a paperback titled The Montauk Project. Experiments in Time by Preston B. Nichols and Peter Moon. His hands shook as he pulled it from the shelf. The cover was faded, the spine cracked, but the words inside, they matched his memories. Camp Hero, the experiments, the chair, time manipulation. All of it, on the page, just as it had played out in his mind. According to Nichols, the Montauk Project had been an offshoot of something even stranger. The Philadelphia Experiment, a rumored Navy operation in 1943 that allegedly made a battleship vanish from Philadelphia and reappear in Norfolk. The government had denied everything, of course. But the Montauk Project had supposedly gone further. It hadn't just cloaked ships, it had torn holes in reality. And in 1983, the project collapsed when something came through. A creature, a psychic manifestation, a nightmare pulled into the physical world. The scientists called it the Beast. It wreaked havoc, and they shut everything down to contain it. Only, they hadn't shut it down. Daniel knew that now. They hadn't buried the project. They had scattered it, broken it into pieces and seeded them in secret bases around the country, each part of the whole hidden, insulated, One failure wouldn't expose the rest. Montauk was only the beginning, and Daniel, he had been part of something much, much bigger. Back at his apartment, Daniel stood motionless in front of his bedroom closet. The door hung open, and his eyes were locked on a metal box resting on the top shelf. It hadn't been there before. At least, not that he remembered, but something deep in his gut told him otherwise. He knew that box, knew exactly what it held. Without thinking, he knelt down and reached beneath his dresser. His fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, taped to the underside, the key, right where some buried instinct had told him it would be. His hands trembled as he unlocked the box. Inside, sitting in the dull glow of the closet light, was a single item, a US bank safety deposit key. The next morning, Daniel drove downtown to First National Bank in Hartford. The building loomed in front of him like a monolith, its polished glass and stone facade untouched by time. He approached the front desk and, without much explanation, handed over the key along with his ID. The manager gave him a curious look, but said nothing, just nodded and led him through a locked door into the vault. Inside the cold, humming chamber, the manager unlocked a metal drawer, slid it out, and left Daniel alone. He stared at the box for a moment, then opened it. His breath, shallow. What he saw inside didn't surprise him, not really, not after everything. Still, the weight of it nearly dropped him to his knees. A sealed manila envelope lay inside, its top bound with red security tape stamped with faded federal insignias. He wasn't supposed to have this. No civilian was. But there it was, waiting for him. With a deep breath, Daniel peeled back the tape and dumped the contents onto the table. Photographs scattered across the metal surface, black and white, stark, unforgiving. Children in a sterile room, hooked to machines, monitors in the background, men in lab coats watching from behind glass. Daniel's breath caught as he recognized his own face in several of the photos. 10 years old, maybe younger. His hair shorter, face thinner, eyes wide with fear. Electrodes clung to his scalp. In one image, he sat rigid in the Montauk chair, nearly swallowed by the mass of Tesla coils, wires, and glowing equipment that encircled him. He reached for the documents beneath the photos, technical schematics of the chair, scrawled notes, equations so complex and alien that just glancing at them made his temples throb. A folded map of Camp Hero, the surface levels detailed in blue, but the underground sections marked in red, tunnels, chambers, things that didn't appear on any public records. And then he found the list, typed, clinical, precise. Project subjects, Delta Group. His eyes scanned the names, some familiar, some not, until they landed on one that made his hands go cold. Subject 17, primary gate opener, Daniel Cross. He stared at those words until they blurred. At the bottom of the stack lay a paper sleeve with a disc inside. No label, no markings, just a date written in faint pencil, August 12th, 1983. The day the stories said the beast came through. That night, he sat alone in his dark apartment, laptop open in front of him. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating. Then, slowly he inserted the disk. The laptop whirred as it read the data. The screen flickered, then displayed a single video file. Daniel clicked it. The footage began in grainy black and white, a wide shot of a concrete room. In the center, the Montauk chair loomed, surrounded by tangled cables, humming generators, and control panels. His younger self was strapped into the seat. His arms were tight against the restraints. Electrodes trailed from his scalp, chest, and wrists. Men in lab coats stood nearby, watching monitors. 2 soldiers stood at the door, tense. A voice off camera began to count down, initiating Delta Protocol in 3, 2, 1. The lights flickered. The room darkened as all power surged to the chair. Young Daniel's body convulsed violently. His back arched at an unnatural angle, and his eyes rolled up into his skull. Sparks flew from the machinery. Several technicians stumbled backward in alarm. Then it began. At the center of the room, right in front of the chair, the air shimmered and bent, like heat rising from asphalt. Then it ripped. A tear opened in reality itself. A void, deep black, seething with movement, pulsed into existence. Not a shadow, not a trick of light. A hole into somewhere else. Something alive was in there. The camera shook as static rolled across the screen. When the image returned, the lab was chaos. Screams filled the air. People ran, some clutching their faces, others frozen in place. A blood spray painted the far wall. Equipment was burning. Alarms blared, and just on the edge of the frame, partially obscured, was something. A shape that defied logic, constantly shifting. Wrong angles, geometries that couldn't exist. Just looking at it made Daniel's stomach turn and his eyes water. And then, one last moment of clarity. The young boy, himself, stared directly into the camera. Blood trickled from his ears and nose. His mouth moved slowly, deliberately, as if trying to speak through the screen across time. You have to shut it down before it opens again. The video cut to static. Daniel sat frozen. His hands hovered over the laptop, but he didn't move. Couldn't. His mind reeled, not just from the images, but from the sudden cascade of memories snapping into place. Like a puzzle finally clicking together after years in darkness. He remembered now. Everything. The chair, the voices, the pain, the things he had been forced to pull through, the aftermath, and the silence that followed. The next morning, as sunlight filtered weakly through his curtains, Daniel made a call. The number came to him without effort, etched into the bedrock of his memory. The phone rang. Once, twice. Then a voice answered, gravelly, guarded, tired. Hello? Daniel's mouth felt dry. Is this Preston Nichols? A long pause. Who's asking? My name is Daniel Cross. I was subject 17 at Montauk. The silence on the other end stretched so long he thought the line had gone dead. Finally, the old man whispered, voice brittle with age and fear. God help you, boy. They're still watching. I need answers, Daniel said quietly. Please. Not over the phone, Preston said, voice barely audible. They're always listening. Another pause. Then, the lighthouse. Tomorrow, noon. The call ended. Daniel pulled into the cracked gravel lot near Montauk Point Lighthouse, tires crunching in the silence. He sat still for a moment, engine off, heart thudding. He'd gotten there almost an hour early, partly by accident, partly by design. His own car. He ditched that 2 towns back, parked it at a crowded tourist lot, and walked a mile to pick up the rental. Too paranoid to risk being tracked. Too many eyes. Too many possibilities. The lighthouse loomed ahead, red and white stripes like cheerful lies painted over rust and stone. The sky above it hung heavy and grey, the edges of a storm smeared across the horizon. Wind from the Atlantic rolled inland, sharp with salt, and something metallic, almost like blood. Daniel spotted the man immediately. Nichols. Broad-shouldered, older, worn down by time. He sat hunched on a bench that faced the ocean, his weathered, fisherman's coat snapping in the wind. He didn't look at Daniel when he approached, just kept staring out to sea. They told us we were serving our country, Nichols said, as if they were already mid-conversation. His voice was low, almost swallowed by the wind. Advancing human potential, opening new frontiers. What a load of horse shit. Daniel sat down beside him, the bench creaking under their weight. You were there, he said. You helped them, and I've spent most of my life trying to figure out what they did to me. Nichols finally turned. His face, creased, sunburned, tired, bore the weight of decades. His eyes narrowed, taking Daniel in. Jesus, you grew up. He gave a sad little laugh. Last time I saw you, You were a skinny kid with too much power in his head. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What did they do to me? Nichols sighed and pulled a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his coat. His fingers trembled slightly as he lit one, the flame flickering in the wind. You were different, he said, exhaling smoke. Even among the sensitives. Most kids, they could pick up impressions. Some could move small objects, bend spoons, flip a coin, maybe send a thought if the receiver was open enough. He looked at Daniel. But you could open doorways. Daniel felt his stomach clench. Doorways to where? That's the question, isn't it? Nichols took another drag. At first it was just remote viewing, observing distant locations without being there. But then they realized some of you could do more than see. You could reach. And you, Jesus, you could pull others through. Daniel stared at the sea, its grey surface boiling with wind. He could feel something stir inside him, like a buried wire sparking back to life. They started small, Nichols went on. Room to room in the facility, then minutes into the past, then hours. By 82, you were stepping into places we didn't understand. Places that weren't just far away or long ago. The beast, Daniel said, barely above a whisper. Nichols went pale. You remember? I found a recording. Nichols exhaled slowly, cigarette smoke curling into the wind. Then you know what came through wasn't from Earth. Hell, not even from our timeline. It came from somewhere else. Somewhere with different rules, different physics, different... He shook his head. Intentions. He stubbed out the cigarette on the bench slat with a forceful twist. We lost 16 people that day before someone had the sense to cut the power. But it didn't die. It just folded back into wherever it came from. Like a curtain falling shut. Daniel's head throbbed. Memories shifted in his mind like shadows behind frosted glass. They shut it down after that. Officially, yeah. MTOC was terminated. Files closed, facility sealed. But you know how this works. Nichols looked at him hard. They just buried it deeper, broke it into pieces, compartmentalized. The work went underground, literally. I don't remember anything after that day. I have memories, school, college, a job, friends, a whole life. Nichols gave a bitter smile. Artificial, every bit of it. They used the best of MK Ultra's tricks, drug therapy, deep hypnosis, implanted memories, built you a brand new life, brick by brick. You were too valuable to let go, but too dangerous to keep whole. Daniel stared down at his hands. So why am I remembering now? Nichols looked around, suddenly uneasy. That's the part that scares me. The programming doesn't just fail, not by itself. Daniel opened his mouth to answer, but something stopped him. The world stuttered. For a second, less than a blink, the scene around him shifted. He was still at the lighthouse, still beside Nichols, but the sky above was now bright and blue. The storm clouds were gone. Nichols wore different clothes, a security uniform, and the bench was freshly painted. Daniel gasped, dizzy. It felt like looking through two overlapping photographs. Nichols, this version, was speaking again, though his voice echoed strangely, layered with distortion. It's happening again, he said, watching the sea. Temporal distortions are worsening. What's happening to me? Daniel gripped the edge of the bench, his stomach turning inside out. The world rippled like heat over asphalt. Time is bleeding through, Nichols said, his face flickering, older, then younger, then older again. Your connection to the MTOC chair, it never really shut off. It just went quiet, dormant. Daniel swallowed hard. Can it be fixed? There's an access point, Nichols said quickly, his tone urgent. They missed it. Bunker 14, near the old power station. The equipment's still active. You need to... The air around them shimmered, like light through water, a low hum built in Daniel's ears, rising to a pressure that felt like it might crush his skull. And then, everything snapped. Nichols was gone. In his place stood a teenage boy, maybe 17, wearing a faded Camp Hero security badge on his shirt. The kid had Nichols's face, but smooth, unlined, innocent. He blinked at Daniel, and when he spoke, it was in the voice of the old man. "Find the failsafe," he said, "before it's too late." His voice echoed, distant and hollow, unaware of the impossibility of what had just happened. Daniel stared at him, mouth dry, heart hammering in his chest. The storm clouds rolled back in above them. Somewhere deep inside, something ancient stirred. "They're trying to recreate the conditions from '83, the young Nichols said, his voice distant, stretched like a radio signal from too far away. "But they don't understand the danger. The membrane, it's thinner now. The experiments back then. What we did. It weakened things." As he spoke, his form began to flicker like a bad signal. One moment, he was the young man, wide-eyed and unscarred. The next, the older Nichols returned, face lined and eyes full of urgency. He clutched Daniel's arm with a strength that defied his appearance. "Go back to Camp Hero," he said firmly. "Find Bunker 14. Destroy the chair before they use it again." Another wave of distortion rolled through the world like a silent explosion. Daniel's vision fractured, colors inverted, time stuttered, and then it snapped back. He was alone. The bench creaked beneath him. Nearby, a family of tourists strolled past, laughing, holding ice cream cones, glancing at him with subtle concern. He must have looked ghost pale, hands trembling, sweat slicking his brow despite the cool air. That night, Daniel returned to Camp Hero. He waited until after sunset, his car parked deep in the woods, hidden beneath a tarp. The perimeter fence surrounding the abandoned base was rusted and sagging in places. No challenge for someone who remembered exactly where the gaps were. The blind spots in the old security system came back to him in fragments, like dreams bleeding into daylight. He moved with purpose, though his breath quickened with every step. The ranger station was dark, the windows boarded up. Graffiti tagged the walls, but the place was empty, lifeless. Daniel moved past it, deeper into the bones of the forgotten facility. The air grew colder. Familiar buildings loomed in the dark, their shapes half swallowed by vines and rust. With every footstep, more memories surfaced. Hallways he'd once run through, rooms where men in white coats had spoken in low, urgent voices. He reached the power station, a looming shell of steel and concrete, long silent. Its turbines, once deafening, now stood still in the moonlight. Behind it, half concealed by overgrowth and shadow, was a squat concrete bunker. Rust clung to its seams like old blood. A faded number 14 was stenciled on the door. The lock hung loose, snapped open recently. Someone had beaten him here. Daniel pushed the door inward. It groaned like a wounded thing. Inside, a narrow metal staircase descended into blackness. He clicked on his flashlight and stepped down, the beam cutting through thick dust and old air. The further he went, the colder it became. Concrete walls gave way to rough-hewn stone, bedrock carved to make space for something that shouldn't exist. The hair on Daniel's arms rose. The air buzzed faintly, charged, like before a lightning strike. It smelled faintly of ozone and something stranger, something synthetic and wrong. At the bottom, a long corridor stretched out, vanishing into the dark. He walked. With each step, the distortions grew stronger. Suddenly, the corridor shimmered, and in the flicker of an eye, he saw it as it once was. Brightly lit, bustling with scientists, armed guards standing at attention. Conversations echoed around him, overlapping with the silence of the present. Technicians passed by, their ghostly forms phasing through him. Daniel staggered, overwhelmed. The corridor ended at a massive steel vault door. It stood slightly ajar, its hinges stained with age. Beyond it lay the heart of the Montauk Project. The chamber was vast, ceiling lost in shadow. The air felt thick, like walking underwater. Massive cables ran across the floor and walls. Machines hummed softly, some clearly decades old, blinking like tired eyes. Others sleek and modern, recently installed. Workbenches were cluttered with tools. A whiteboard stood propped against a wall, covered in symbols, equations, and a date, tomorrow night. And in the center of the room stood the chair. It looked almost simple at first glance. Metal frame, restraints, a nest of wires trailing into machines, but it radiated wrongness, like it shouldn't exist, like reality itself was offended by it. It had no business being here, or anywhere. Daniel stepped closer, and something inside him cracked. Suddenly, he was two people. One version stood there, flashlight trembling in hand, staring at the dormant machine. The other was strapped into it, years ago, a child again, trembling as wires were clipped to his scalp. He heard the voices of technicians murmuring, the low hum of the machine coming to life. Fear clawed at his throat. "Good morning, Daniel." The voice echoed from both past and present, familiar, calm, controlled. Daniel turned. Dr. Bennett stepped out from the shadows. Older now, hair silver, lines across his face, but those same cold blue eyes, untouched by time. "You," Daniel breathed. "You're still running this?" "Did you think we'd walk away?" Bennett asked, approaching slowly. "After what we learned, after what you showed us was possible?" "You need to stop," Daniel said. "Shut this down. You have no idea what you're doing." "Oh, but we do," Bennett replied. He gestured around the room. "We've spent 4 decades refining the process, studying every piece of data from '83. That incident was unfortunate, but progress always requires sacrifice. 16 people died, and we learned more in that one moment than we had in 10 years. Do you realize what you did back then? You opened a gateway to another plane of existence, another reality, something we've only begun to understand." Daniel backed toward the chair, his hand brushing its armrest. "It was cold, too cold. I came here to destroy it," he said. "No," Bennett said, stepping closer, smiling faintly. "You came because you're still connected to it. The chair never let you go, and you've returned right on schedule, just like we knew you would." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Something shifted again, deep inside, like a forgotten door swinging open. Memories surged, disjointed but real. Screams, light, a shape pulling itself through a crack in the air. "You can't control it," he said, voice shaking. "That thing we brought through, it wasn't meant for this world." "And yet, it reached back," Bennett said softly. "It touched your mind. It changed you. And now you've come full circle. Welcome home, Daniel. Because on a quantum level, you never really left that chair." Bennett glanced over Daniel's shoulder and nodded at someone standing just out of sight. "Your memories, your life outside, none of it was real," Bennett said quietly, almost like revealing a secret. "It was just a placeholder, while your mind grew into what we needed." Daniel's stomach dropped. Too late. A sudden shift behind him made his skin crawl. Before he could react, a sharp sting exploded in his neck, cold, precise, the tip of a hypodermic needle sliding into his flesh. The room spun sideways, colors blurring and stretching as the sedative coursed through his veins. Darkness crept in like a slow tide. "Welcome home, Subject 17, Bennett's voice echoed through the fog. "Tomorrow, you'll help us open the ultimate doorway." When Daniel's eyes finally fluttered open, he was strapped tightly into the chair. Thick, leather straps bit into his wrists and chest. Electrodes pressed coldly against his temples and chest, sending faint tingles into his skin. Around him, the bunker thrummed with electrical energy. Rows of blinking machines, banks of monitors, technicians in white coats busily checking readouts. Armed guards stood rigidly along the walls, their eyes never wavering. His mind felt sharper now, clearer than it had in days. No longer clouded by the chemical haze that had dulled his thoughts. Memories came rushing back in a flood. His childhood, endless testing, the growing unease among the scientists as they uncovered something far beyond their understanding. Most of all, he remembered what truly came through that gate in 1983. Dr. Bennett stepped forward, clipboard in hand, eyes gleaming with clinical excitement. Your consciousness has returned. Excellent. We don't have much time before the window aligns. Daniel tried to wrench free, but the restraints held firm. You can't do this, he growled. You saw what happened last time. A miscalculation. That entity, it wasn't stable in our dimension. Bennett didn't flinch. He glanced at a nearby monitor, scanning the data. This time, we're prepared. The integration will be controlled. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs, a cold dread settling deep in his chest. Integration? You're not just opening a doorway. You want to bring something through. Permanently. Bennett's smile was thin and tight, not reaching his eyes. Not something, Daniel. Someone, or perhaps more accurately, someone's. He gestured toward a massive screen flickering with images. Strange technology. Biomechanical enhancements. Weapons far beyond anything humanity had developed. Our visitors have so much to offer, Bennett said softly. Knowledge, power, the next step in evolution. He turned a dial, sending a subtle vibration through the chair beneath Daniel. All they ask in return, Bennett whispered, is a suitable host, one who can survive the integration. They're not visitors, Daniel said, voice shaking but firm. They're invaders, and you're handing them the keys. Bennett ignored him, addressing the technicians. Begin initialization sequence. Power at 70%. The chair hummed to life, a low vibration creeping through Daniel's body. A strange sensation flooded his mind, like something stretching inside him, his consciousness being pulled out, reaching into unseen dimensions. Around the room, waveforms danced across monitors in a rhythmic pulse. One technician called out, "Quantum tunneling effect established, temporal aperture forming." Daniel closed his eyes, drawing inward, focusing on the calm center of his mind. They thought they controlled him, using him as a tool. But they'd forgotten one thing, something even he had only just remembered. He wasn't just a key to open the door. He was the doorway itself. Back in 1983, when that creature had first emerged, the young Daniel had done something desperate. In those last moments, he imprinted a hidden failsafe into the quantum fabric of the chair, a secret backdoor only he could access. As power surged around him, Daniel reached deep into that hidden channel. His mind expanded beyond normal time and space. He could feel them waiting on the other side, vast, ancient intelligences pressing against the thin membrane between worlds, like fingers testing the fragile skin of a soap bubble. And they were hungry. Aperture at 60%, a technician called out, voice tense. Dimensional breach imminent. Bennett leaned close, voice low and eager. Can you feel them? They've waited so long to meet us. Yes, Daniel whispered, eyes still closed. I can feel them, but they're not what you think. Suddenly, alarms blared. Power surge, the technician shouted. Systems drawing beyond input capacity. Bennett spun toward the screens, panic flickering in his eyes. That's impossible. Check. It's me, Daniel said, voice eerily calm, blood trickling from his nose. I'm the power source now. I always was. Around the room, equipment sparked and hissed, monitors flashing red as the bunker plunged into chaos. The lights in the bunker flickered wildly, buzzing as if protesting what was about to happen. Every system on the grid drained its power into a single focal point, the chair. Daniel sat strapped in, metal biting into his back and thighs, the heat beneath him rising to blistering levels. His skin hissed where it met the scorching steel, but he hardly felt it. Something far bigger than pain was happening. At the center of the room, the air shimmered like a heat haze, then twisted unnaturally, folding and crumpling in ways that defied logic. It looked like space itself was being wrung out like wet fabric. The distortion pulsed, forming a kind of rip, or maybe a window, into a place that didn't obey the rules of this world. From the other side, there were glimpses, brief stomach-churning flashes of towering structures that bent in ways no architecture should, that seemed to move even as they stood still. Shapes composed not of flesh, but of light, thought, and something else, something raw and ancient. Yes, Bennett whispered, eyes wide, voice trembling with awe. Yes, it's working! A technician nearby, face pale and slick with sweat, grabbed Bennett's arm. Sir, look at the readings. The subject's brainwaves are spiking. He's overriding the navigation coordinates. What? Bennett snapped, eyes darting to the monitor. He's changing the destination. We need to cut the neural link. Now! We can't, the tech said, panic rising in his voice. He bypassed the failsafes. He's in full control. Daniel's eyes snapped open. They glowed, not with light, but with something deeper, something internal. The glow didn't cast shadows. It simply was. When he spoke, his voice rang with layered tones that vibrated the glass in the observation room. I'm not opening a door, he said. I'm creating a vacuum, a one-way passage. The aperture widened, its edges swirling with colors that didn't belong in any spectrum known to man. Darkness surged through it, alive and angry. The air howled toward the void, pulling at loose papers, tools, even entire carts. Bennett clutched the railing, eyes wide with disbelief. What are you doing? He shouted over the growing storm. What I should have done 40 years ago, Daniel said calmly. The restraints snapped, not broken, released, as if recognizing he no longer needed them. His body lifted slightly off the chair, suspended in a grip that had no physical source. I'm collapsing the bridge, Daniel said. Forever. The suction grew more violent. A guard screamed as he lost his footing, sliding helplessly across the floor. His body stretched grotesquely as it neared the vortex, then vanished with a wet crack. Others held on to bolted-down consoles, eyes wild. You'll destroy everything, Bennett screamed, crawling toward the control panel on elbows and knees. No, Daniel said. Only the infection, the chair, the tech, the knowledge we stole, all of it. Everything that doesn't belong in this world. The sound that followed was unbearable. A deep, resonant tearing, like the universe itself was splitting open. The aperture grew, swallowing the chair in one sudden motion. Metal twisted, groaned, and vanished into the black. Sparks flew as wires unraveled into glowing strands and evaporated. Bennett lunged at Daniel, fury overtaking reason. We were so close. As the doctor's hand touched his arm, Daniel turned to him, just for a moment, and felt something unexpected. Pity. They were never going to share with us, Doctor, Daniel said softly. We weren't their equals. We were livestock. The floor shuddered, then buckled as the building's supports began to fail. The walls cracked. Pieces of the ceiling fell in heavy chunks. Through the storm of debris, Daniel glimpsed something, beginning to emerge from the portal. It wasn't entering this world. It was being dragged back. The thing, the beast of Montauk, had waited in the spaces between dimensions for decades. Now it returned, unwillingly. Daniel couldn't see it fully. His mind refused to register its form. He saw fragments, shifting, masses of geometry that stung his eyes, countless glistening eyes, and a presence that spoke directly into his thoughts. You have closed the way, but there are other doors, other keys. As everything collapsed, Daniel forced the last of his will into the gateway, sealing it not with code or machines, but with his own consciousness. He became the lock. Then darkness. He woke to the sound of beeping, steady, rhythmic, sterile. Sunlight slipped through the slats of Venetian blinds, painting lines across the white hospital sheets. The world smelled of antiseptic, and distant ocean salt. He was weak, just moving. His fingers felt like lifting weights. A nurse noticed his fluttering eyelids and rushed out, returning moments later with a doctor, a middle-aged woman with warm eyes and a tired smile. "You're awake," she said gently. "That's good." She told him they'd found him unconscious on the beach near Montauk Point. He was severely dehydrated, sunburned, and in a coma for 6 days. "Do you remember anything?" she asked. Daniel stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No," he lied. 3 days later, he checked himself out of the hospital, despite warnings about his condition. When he got back to his apartment, the place looked untouched. But it wasn't. Nothing was out of place, but everything felt wrong. Too clean, too precise. His computer was gone. So were his sketchbooks, journals, notebooks, years of work. Someone had come through with surgical efficiency, leaving no mess, but stripping it all away. He stood in the center of his living room, eyes closed, and felt the quiet like a pressure in his chest. Whoever they were, they didn't need to leave a trace. They had what they wanted, and somewhere, out there in the spaces between, they were still looking for doors. In place of the stolen notebooks and missing computer, Daniel found a slim manila folder lying neatly on his desk. Like it had always been there, waiting. He stared at it for a long moment before touching it. Inside was a single document, a formal job offer from the US Department of Energy, triple his previous salary, full relocation package, unrestricted clearance. The message between the lines was painfully clear. Forget everything. Take the money. Live quietly, comfortably. But know we're always watching. Daniel held the paper in his hands, feeling its weight, its threat disguised as opportunity. He didn't hesitate. He set it alight in the sink and watched it burn until nothing but grey ash remained. Then he got to work. Over the next 7 days, he moved like a ghost through the city, switching buses, using cash, staying off cameras where he could. He bought a high-end laptop from a second-hand tech store in Queens. In Brooklyn, he hit 3 separate hobbyist electronics shops, buying broadcasting components, frequency modulators, RF splitters, nothing too exotic on its own. But together, they could be shaped into something dangerous, something loud. He checked into a rundown motel off the interstate under the name Matthew Locke, a name plucked from a childhood memory. 1 room, no questions, paid for a week, cash only. There, beneath the dim, flickering light of a single overhead bulb, Daniel assembled his makeshift transmission rig. The gear was cobbled together, ugly but functional. He soldered connections with a shaky hand, each joint carrying the weight of what he needed to say. By the end of the week, he had a crude but powerful setup capable of hijacking local TV signals, streaming through fringe internet networks, even bouncing off amateur satellite relays. It wasn't sophisticated, but it would be heard. Daniel sat in front of the camera. His eyes were bloodshot, face drawn and pale. He clicked the record button. "My name is Daniel Cross," he began, voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "Until recently, I was Subject 17 in a classified government program known internally as the Montauk Project. What I'm about to say may sound like a conspiracy theory. It's not. I wish it were." He took a breath, gathering himself. Montauk wasn't a myth, and it sure as hell wasn't just some Cold War curiosity. It was real. Still is. Back in the late 70s, early 80s, the government operated illegal experiments out of Camp Hero, a decommissioned Air Force base at Montauk Point, New York. They were researching mind control, teleportation, dimensional breaches, and they weren't using willing participants. They used children, kids like me, psychically sensitive, emotionally unstable, perfect for their tests. His voice cracked. He paused, swallowed, pushed on. They built a device, the Montauk chair. It wasn't just tech. It was a psychic amplifier, a gate key. With the right mind in the chair, it could twist reality, open holes in it, let things in. Daniel leaned closer to the camera. They thought they were contacting higher beings, thought they'd get knowledge, technology. But those things they made contact with, they weren't teachers. They weren't even curious. They were predators, patient, intelligent. They offered visions, power, secrets. And the scientists, some of them, believed. Others tried to stop it. Too late. He wiped at his nose. Blood was beginning to trickle. Again. In 1983 there was an incident. We called it the beast. Something came through. Not all the way, but enough. 16 people died. Officially. What happened next was classic damage control. The project was shut down. Everyone silenced. Everything buried. But the truth is, it never stopped. It just went deeper underground. Black sites, new code names, smaller operations, harder to track. Daniel sat back slightly. He looked exhausted. Last week they tried again. They brought me back, the only one who ever fully opened the gate. I was supposed to make a permanent bridge, but I closed it. I destroyed the chair and sealed the breach. I don't know how long I have before they find me. Maybe hours. He looked down, breathing shallow now. The blood was coming faster. The entities can't come through directly anymore, but they've left fingerprints. They whisper to people, offer them forbidden knowledge. They don't need bodies. They work through ambition, through hunger, and some have already listened. Daniel picked up a flash drive and held it up to the camera. With this broadcast, I'm uploading documents, photos, research notes, coordinates to suspected continuation sites. I've hidden more physical evidence. If I disappear, it'll release automatically. He leaned in one last time. His voice was thin but clear. Watch for the signs. Military facilities with no clear purpose. Children who vanish from foster systems. Weather patterns that don't make sense. These aren't random. These are echoes, continuations. Montauk never ended. Daniel exhaled slowly, visibly shaking now. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, like it doesn't belong, pay attention. The membrane between worlds is thin now. Things slip through. Not just monsters. Ideas, emotions, urges that don't feel like they're yours. That's them. His lips trembled. They made us forget. But memory is a dangerous thing. He stared into the lens, a long, final look. Then the feed cut to static. Daniel leaned in toward the webcam, his face gaunt and pale, eyes shadowed with sleepless nights. But behind the exhaustion was something sharp, something unshakable. Determination, fear didn't own him anymore. The camera's red light blinked one final time. The recording ended. He uploaded the video without hesitation, dragging scanned files into encrypted folders, government documents, photographs, handwritten notes, all the evidence he'd clawed out of obscurity. He'd spent weeks setting up distribution protocols, scattering the files across hundreds, maybe thousands of servers around the world. It wouldn't be enough to stop them entirely, but it was enough to make erasure impossible, enough to make silence look like guilt. The last file completed its upload. His laptop screen flickered. For a moment, just static, jagged lines of digital snow. Then the pattern emerged. He froze. It was the same pulsing signal he'd seen on his television weeks earlier. Back then, it had confused him, made his skin crawl. Now, it stirred something else. Recognition, not fear. Resonance. This wasn't a warning. It was a call, not from them, but from others. People like him, the children of Montauk, waking up, remembering. He wasn't alone. Daniel snapped. The laptop shut. He moved through the motel room like a man coming out of a dream. He tossed the last of his things into a worn duffel bag. Just clothes, hard drives, notebooks full of scribbled equations and sketches of symbols he still didn't fully understand. Outside, tires crunched over gravel. He peeked through the curtain. 2 black SUVs, unmarked. The men who stepped out wore suits that didn't fit quite right, too clean, too formal for a place like this. They moved in sync, purposeful. Government, or something worse. Too late. The truth was out now, moving through channels they couldn't follow, whispered between servers and copied onto drives faster than they could chase. It would land in inboxes, private forums, peer-to-peer webs, a seed planted in just the right minds. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, springs creaking in the silence. His hands were steady, his breath slow. They wouldn't stop it. Not this time. Something had changed in him after Montauk. Something they'd tried to bury. The tests, the machines, the signal pulses. They hadn't just studied him. They had unlocked him. The gifts hadn't gone away. They'd just been waiting. Footsteps pounded the walkway outside. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he reached. Not with fingers, but with thought. He felt it. The web of connections stretching through space-time, taut and humming. Quantum threads, invisible to the waking mind, but there nonetheless. There were other places, other times. He had been their best gate opener. They had taught him how, and now he remembered. The door exploded open. 2 agents stormed in, guns raised, movements sharp and rehearsed. But the room was empty. The bathroom light was off. The window still locked from the inside. No sign of forced escape. On the bed, glowing softly in the dim light, Daniel's phone buzzed. A message displayed on the screen. Dr. Bennett, there are other doors, other keys, and now I have them all. 3 days later, around the globe, screens flickered. For just a heartbeat, a single symbol appeared. A triangle intersecting a perfect circle. Then it vanished. No trace left behind. The Montauk Project was never publicly acknowledged. Whispers about it were dismissed, discredited. Anyone who dug too deep found themselves silenced. Car crashes, disappearances, psychiatric holds. A conspiracy's classic playbook. But something had shifted. People began noticing things, small things. A voice whispering from untuned radios, patterns in static. Children started talking about dreams, dreams of underground rooms filled with machines and lights, needles, questions, pain. Researchers began to document strange temporal events, time slips, overlapping memories, coordinates that didn't make sense. The veil had thinned, and always the same phrase whispered just beneath the noise. They made us forget. But memory is dangerous, especially when it remembers the future. Behind the camera, Maya Torres rolled her eyes, but said nothing. She'd heard Jason make speeches like this before. Montauk, MK Ultra, time travel, moon landing inconsistencies. He was passionate, obsessive, borderline unhinged, but she stuck with him. Someone had to keep the technical side running. This time, though, something felt different. Jason leaned back in his chair and spun to face her. His face was lit up with something more than excitement. It was purpose. "Cut the recording," he said. Maya reached for the switch. "Done." He grinned like a kid on Christmas morning. "You get the email?" She nodded, brushing a strand of black hair behind her ear. "Yeah, Desert Valley Logistics. You got the job. Somehow." "Not somehow," Jason said, practically bouncing in his seat. 6 months of setup, fake references, backdated tax returns, scrubbed social media. I built a whole damn persona. Maya raised an eyebrow. "You're delivering food to a military base. It's not exactly infiltrating the Pentagon." "It gets me through the door," he countered. "That's more than anyone else has managed." She didn't respond right away, but her fingers tapped anxiously on the desk. Jason could tell she wasn't convinced, but she was in. She always was. Something told her this time might not be like the others. The plan had been quietly evolving for over a year. Jason had tracked every movement, every contract, every name tied to Desert Valley Logistics, a private company that handled meal services for multiple military sites in Nevada. One of them stood out: the Nevada Test and Training Range. More specifically, the facility inside it. Area 51. Maya sat cross-legged on the van's bench seat, her tablet glowing in the dark as she flipped through encrypted folders. "Let's run it again," she said, voice low, focused. "I start the job Monday. First month, just standard deliveries. Keep my head down, make friends, build trust. Then I start recording, routes, security routines, checkpoint protocols. And I'll be wearing the glasses." She glanced up. Jason nodded, half distracted by the blueprint tacked to the corkboard beside him. "The glasses," he echoed, "cost us nearly every cent we had." "Microscopic lenses," Jason, Maya, said. "They're invisible to most scans. Do you know how insane that is?" "Worth every penny," he said without looking up. "They transmit directly to the van through the watch, modified with a boosted signal and encrypted relay. We're ghosts in their system." The plan was nothing short of surgical. Jason would go in under a real job working for Desert Valley Logistics, no red flags. Every shift he'd gather intel, slow, methodical, undetected. Meanwhile, Maya had been gutting and rebuilding a white-paneled utility van into a full-blown mobile command post. Signal boosters, satellite uplinks, multi-layered VPN chains to obscure their location. It looked like an old courier vehicle. Inside, it was war-ready tech. The long game was simple. Collect everything. Every door code, every routine, every anomaly. Then, during a scheduled drop-off, Jason would veer from the approved path. Just once. Just long enough to slip into a part of the base few civilians even knew existed. Cameras rolling the entire time. "You do get this isn't just trespassing, right?" Maya said, eyes still on the map. "This is federal land. Classified. If they catch you, it's not a slap on the wrist. It's years behind bars. No bail, no trial. Just gone." Jason's face darkened. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the mess of paper and string pinned to the corkboard. "Do you know why I do this? For the views. For the followers," Maya said quietly, though without sarcasm. "No," Jason said, turning to face her. "That's not it." He pointed to the board. A grainy photo of a man in military fatigues was pinned near the center, slightly faded. "My dad worked at Groom Lake. 12 years. He came home one night with a migraine that never went away. 2 months later, stage 4 brain cancer. No family history, no warning." Maya's fingers paused mid-scroll. She looked at him, her expression softening. "He tried to tell my mum something before he died," Jason continued, voice low. "Kept talking about things in the sky, about intelligence that wasn't from here. She thought it was the meds, hallucinations. But I don't think it was." There was a long silence between them. "I believe him," Jason said. "And I need to know the truth. For him. For me." Maya nodded slowly, accepting it. There was no changing his mind. There never had been. "Okay," she said, turning back to the screen. "The stream routes through our private server first. If anything happens, if you're caught, hurt, disappear, it uploads automatically to 17 separate platforms, all at once. No stopping it. Dead man's switch," Jason said quietly. "Perfect." "Not the word I'd use," Maya muttered. The next 6 weeks vanished in a storm of logistics and nerves. Jason slipped into the delivery job with practiced ease, memorizing routes, checkpoint questions, guard habits. He made sure to be friendly but forgettable. The kind of guy no one noticed. Maya's van became a second home. She installed redundant power systems, solar backups, multiple internet failsafes. Every inch was wired for surveillance and communication. They spent countless nights in the desert, testing the cameras, mapping the cell dead zones, scanning for drone flyovers. They learned where to park without attracting attention, how to time uploads around security sweeps. The glasses worked flawlessly, quietly beaming high-res footage to Maya's receivers, hallways, gate codes, off-limit corridors. Jason's YouTube channel fell quiet, but his followers stayed, He kept them curious with cryptic posts. The truth is closer than you think. Some secrets refuse to stay buried, the subscriber count ticked past 1 million. He barely noticed. 2 days before the infiltration, Maya found him sitting alone in the van, holding an old photo of his father, taken before the illness, before the silence. A younger man, smiling in uniform beside, a sign that read, Groom Lake Test Facility, authorized personnel only. You know, Maya said gently, we could still pull the plug. Say it's not the right time. Come back in a month. Jason didn't look at her. He just shook his head. We've come too far, he said. If there's nothing in there, if it's just concrete and trucks, then I'll say that. I'll show it. But I don't believe that. Not for a second. Maya sighed, pushing her hair behind her ear. That trucker last month, the one who said he saw something weird during a late-night delivery? Jason nodded. He mentioned aircraft. That didn't match anything on public record. Said the personnel looked different, taller, pale skin, black eyes. His post got deleted. Whole account wiped within hours. Exactly, Jason said. Maybe a hoax, or maybe proof. We're not going to know until we're inside. That night, neither of them slept. Jason lay on the narrow cot in the van, eyes fixed on the ceiling, heart pounding. Maya sat beside the server tower, rechecking cables for the 100th time. Outside, the desert wind howled softly against the side of the van, like the earth itself was holding its breath. Jason went over the plan one last time, pacing nervously, in the narrow van while Mia sat cross-legged in the back, triple, checking the equipment. Camera feeds are clean, she said, eyes flicking from one screen to another. Audio's solid. Encrypted channels open. Jason gave a quiet nod, unusually subdued. You okay? Mia asked, watching him carefully. He hesitated before answering. Yeah, just thinking. This might be the most important thing we ever do. Mia reached over and squeezed his hand, grounding him. Then we stick to the plan. Get in, document whatever we can, and get the hell out. No heroics. Jason offered a faint smirk. Yes, Mom. They didn't say what they were both thinking, that, by this time tomorrow, they could be rewriting history, or erased from it entirely. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a blazing sun as Jason guided the delivery truck down a desolate highway. Heat shimmered off the asphalt. The AC wheezed, barely making a dent in the stifling air inside the cab. Sweat clung to his skin, his hands slick on the steering wheel. Checkpoint 1's coming up in 2 miles, Mia's voice came through the nearly invisible earpiece in his right ear. Just like we practiced. Normal delivery. Copy that, Jason muttered, tugging at the stiff collar of his uniform shirt. The Desert Valley logistics patch on his chest felt like a costume now, a flimsy disguise that did little to calm his nerves. Checkpoint 1 was familiar, a small guard station at the edge of the Nevada test and training range. Jason had passed through it dozens of times over the last few months, enough to become a forgettable face. He rolled to a stop and handed his ID badge, delivery manifest, and clearance documents to the guard. Morning, Reeve, said the man, Peterson, casual, friendly. Jason had made a point of chatting him up during past visits. Build trust, stay invisible. Traffic was light, Jason replied smoothly, maintaining eye contact but not too much. His glasses, innocuous and black-rimmed, were transmitting everything live to Mia, who was parked in a van 3 miles back. Peterson glanced over the papers, ran a scanner across the barcode, and gave a nod. All clear. Stick to the designated route. Jason gave a small wave and pulled forward. The gate lifted with a mechanical groan. He exhaled slowly as the truck rolled past the boundary. Checkpoint 1's clear, he whispered. How's the feed? Crystal, Mia responded instantly. 35 viewers on the private stream so far. Just a reminder, I'm not going public with this until you're out and safe. Understood. The road ahead stretched like a scar across the desert, flanked by dry scrub and distant security towers that looked like silent sentinels. Jason had mapped all of them. where they faced, how far they turned, their blind spots. He'd studied. This like his life depended on it, because it did. "Second checkpoint coming up," he said after another 15 minutes of driving. This one was different. Serious. Unlike the casual first stop, this checkpoint was manned by armed military. Personnel, no-nonsense faces under dark glasses. His chest tightened as the truck slowed to a halt. 2 guards approached. One took his paperwork. The other circled the vehicle with a mirror attached to a long pole, checking underneath for explosives or unauthorized cargo. "Step out of the vehicle, sir," the first guard ordered. Jason obeyed, trying not to fidget. The camera glasses on his face felt heavier now. The watch on his wrist buzzed silently, confirming to Mia that the feed was still live. "Just a routine inspection," the guard said, though his flat voice made it sound like anything but. "Arms out." Jason raised his arms as the handheld scanner passed over his chest, then stopped at his wrist. "It's our company tracker," he explained calmly before the guard could ask. "Standard protocol. All drivers wear them for route monitoring." The guard studied the device for a moment, then gave a curt nod. If scanned, the watch would show as a basic GPS unit. Jason had made sure of that. Its true purpose as a secure transmitter was buried deep beneath the surface. "Your delivery today is for the Mesa unit?" the guard asked, scanning the manifest again. "Yes, sir. Weekly supply run. Nothing special. Non-perishables. Canned. Food. Bottled water." The guard looked at him a beat longer than necessary. Jason kept his expression blank, his breathing steady. "You've been doing this run for a while, haven't you?" 3 months, Jason replied evenly. "Quiet. Job. Pays decent, can't complain." Finally, the guard handed the papers back. "Proceed to delivery point Charlie. Do not deviate from the route. Any stops or changes will be treated as a breach. You understand?" "Crystal clear," Jason said, climbing back into the truck. As the second gate opened with a loud clank, something in the air shifted, charged, tense, like a static field before a storm. Jason drove on, the desert pressing in around him, silent and waiting. He was in, past the last checkpoint, past the point of no return. Jason's hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as the truck rolled past the second gate. The landscape around him flattened into a barren basin, the jagged desert hills giving way to the wide valley that held secrets most people could only speculate about. "I'm in," he said under his breath. His voice barely stirred the air inside the cab. "Second. Checkpoint cleared," Mia confirmed, her voice a steady anchor in his ear. "Viewer counts climbing. People are sharing the stream, almost 200 watching now." The road sloped gently downward. As Jason crested the ridge, the facility finally came into full view. He slowed instinctively. It was massive, far, bigger than the satellite images ever suggested. Clusters of buildings sprawled across the flatland, some clearly administrative, others resembling aircraft hangars, and several structures with no obvious function at all. Thick fences looped around the perimeter in concentric circles, broken only by security towers and gates. He spotted cameras, sensor arrays, and what looked like radar domes, all silently watching. "This is it, Mia," he murmured. "No turning back now." "Copy that," she replied, softer now. The truck followed a cracked asphalt path leading to a squat building with loading bays. The delivery point. Jason backed the vehicle up to one of the docks, his movements rehearsed but not robotic. He set the brake and hopped out, clipboard in hand. "Routine delivery," he said to the 2 men waiting at the bay doors. 26 crates today, mostly non-perishables, and some cold storage. One of them, Gaza, a thick-set guy with a sun-reddened face and a permanently annoyed expression, gave him a familiar grunt. Yeah. We'll take it from here." Jason hesitated, pretending to scan the clipboard. This was the moment. "Actually," he said casually, "I need to verify the cold storage items myself. Company's cracking down after that spoilage issue last month." Gaza sighed and rolled his eyes. "Of course they are. All right, follow me." Jason stepped down from the loading dock and trailed behind Gaza through a set of metal double doors. He fought to stay calm, his eyes absorbing every hallway, every door, every camera. "Feed still holding," he whispered, once Gaza was a few steps ahead. "Perfect," Mia answered. "But Jason, this is already deeper than we planned. Be careful." They passed through a long, stainless steel kitchen and into a large walk-in cooler. Jason made a show of checking the temperature gauges and inspecting a few crates, his glasses quietly recording every moment. Then came the next step. "Hey," he said to Gaza, "is there a restroom I can use?" Gaza pointed down the hall. "Out. Those doors. First left." "Thanks." Jason stepped out, but instead of turning left, he turned right the moment Gaza's back was turned. "Jason?" Mia's voice sharpened. "What are you doing? This isn't the plan." "Change of plans," he whispered. "This might be the only shot we get." He walked quickly, but not so fast as to draw attention. He kept his posture relaxed, his gaze direct, like someone who knew exactly where he was supposed to be. The corridors here were clinical and bland. White painted walls, linoleum floors, fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly overhead. Bulletin boards dotted the walls with employee notices, safety drills, cafeteria menus. 600 viewers, Mia reported, her tone tight. Words spreading fast. Jason turned a corner and the atmosphere shifted. The walls here were darker, matte grey instead of hospital white. The lighting dimmed. No more bulletin boards, no more windows. At the end of the hall stood a thick metal door with a keypad next to it. "Dead end," Jason muttered, glancing over his shoulder, about to double back. Click. The door opened. Woman in a lab coat stepped through, absorbed in something on a tablet. Jason didn't hesitate. He shifted his stance and called out in a confused voice. "Hey, sorry, I think I got turned around. Is this the way back to the loading dock?" She looked up sharply, startled by his presence. "How did you even get down here?" He pointed, vaguely back the way he came. "Food delivery, first time doing this route. I must have taken a wrong turn." The woman eyed him for a long second, suspicious, but she seemed to buy it. "This is a restricted wing," she said. "You're not supposed to be here. Go back the way you came. Second left. Follow the signs." "Got it. Thanks, Jason," Yi said, already pivoting. As she turned to walk away, Jason noticed the door hadn't shut completely. The lock hadn't clicked. "Mia, no, Jason, don't," she warned, instantly reading his thoughts. "This is too far," but it was already done. He slipped through the door before it closed behind the lab tech, heart pounding in his ears. "I'm in," he breathed. He stopped dead in his tracks. "Mia, you're not going to believe what I'm seeing." "Define what you're seeing," she snapped, her voice tight with urgency. "And start moving back toward the exit. Now." Now Jason stood frozen in the dim corridor, his mind scrambling to make sense of what lay ahead. This part of the facility wasn't like the rest. Nothing about it felt familiar. "The walls," he muttered, turning his head slowly to let his glasses capture every detail. "They're coated in some kind of metal, not steel. It has this dull, eerie glow, almost like it's alive." The hallway curved gently, lit by recessed lights that pulsed softly, almost like a slow heartbeat beneath his skin. There were no doors, no side hallways, just a single path, stretching forward into shadow. Suddenly, his earpiece crackled. "Viewer count just past 1,000, Maya's voice reported, excitement threading through her warning. "The stream's blowing up, Jason." He hesitated. "Maya, seriously, you need to pull me out. This wasn't in the plan." "No way," Jason answered, voice thick with awe as he stepped forward. "I'm too close now. I have to see this." The floor vibrated faintly beneath his boots, the sensation subtle but steady, like the place itself was breathing beneath him. A chill crept into the air, and he saw his own breath cloud in front of him like mist. His glasses zoomed in on strange carvings etched into the metal walls. "Jason, what are those?" Maya asked, her voice tense. "They're symbols," he said quietly, tracing the patterns with his eyes. Nothing I've seen before. Not English, not any language I know. Might want to hurry. Security's gonna notice you're gone any second. Then Jason stopped, frozen again, eyes narrowing. Wait, do you hear that? Maya listened, silent on her end, then whispered back. Yeah. There's a low humming, like a melody, almost. It's coming from everywhere, but nowhere at once. Jason swallowed hard. Feels like it's trying to say something. The corridor slowly widened, opening into a circular chamber that swallowed the light. Jason's heart hammered as he stepped inside, and the sight stole his breath away. At the center floated a strange object, neither fully alive nor fully machine. It hovered about 3 feet off the floor with no visible support, shifting in blues and purples beneath a translucent skin that pulsed gently. Are you seeing this, Maya? His voice cracked, trembling with disbelief. Please tell me you're recording. Recording, she confirmed, voice steady despite the awe. Jason's eyes didn't leave the entity. What the hell is it? The thing shifted, as if sensing him, tendrils or limbs extending slowly, probing the air. It's reacting, Jason whispered, stepping closer. The light changes when I move. Around the room's edge, a ring of monitors and scientific equipment hummed softly. Jason approached one, his glasses reading scrolling lines of data, diagrams, measurements, all focused on the hovering figure. This is it, Jason breathed. This is what my father warned me about. Non-terrestrial intelligence. It's not a ship or just some tech. They're hiding a living being here. Or something pretending to be alive. Jason, be careful, Maya cautioned. Jason circled the room, recording everything. The walls plastered with the same strange symbols, but here arranged like star charts. His fingers brushed lightly over the glass of his glasses as he studied. Them. These look like maps, he murmured. Not of our solar system. Something else. The hum grew louder, swelling around him like a tide. Frost began forming on the edges of nearby equipment as the temperature dropped sharply. Maya's voice crackled through again. 2,000 viewers now. People are freaking out, asking if this is real or some kind of hoax. It's real, Jason assured her, eyes locked on the floating entity. I can feel the cold from here, like static electricity in the air. He reached out, hand trembling as it neared the strange membrane. Then a voice broke the silence. Calm, measured, and coming not from the thing, but behind him. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Jason whirled around, heart pounding wildly. Standing at the entrance was a man in a white lab coat, nothing like the mad scientist he'd imagined. Middle-aged, slightly balding, round glasses perched on his nose, with a quiet, almost tired expression. Who are you? Jason asked, swallowing hard. You don't have clearance to be here, the man said calmly, his tone flat but firm. He made no move to sound an alarm or call for security, just stood there, watching Jason carefully. Jason swallowed hard and pointed toward the floating entity. What is that thing? That's classified, the scientist replied, tilting, his head slightly. Though I suspect you already knew that, didn't you, Mr. Reeve? Jason's blood ran cold at the mention of his real name. You know who I am? We do, the man said, stepping further into the room. We've been following your channel, your theories, your every move for some time now. Jason instinctively took a small step back. Who are you? The project team, the scientist answered quietly. Though, honestly, I imagine you're more interested in what that is than who we are. The entity pulsed brighter, its tendrils moving faster, almost as if agitated by the conversation. Is it alive? Jason asked, the journalist in him rising despite the knot of fear tightening in his stomach. In a manner of speaking, the scientist said carefully. It's not alive in any way we traditionally define life. It exists simultaneously in multiple states and possibly multiple dimensions. And you're studying it? Jason pressed. We're communicating with it, or trying to, the scientist corrected. It's been challenging. Jason's mind raced. This was far beyond anything he'd expected. Not just evidence of alien life, but active research, real communication. How long has it been here? Since 1947, the scientist said matter-of-factly. Though not in this form, it's been evolving. Before Jason could respond, a sharp alarm blared through the facility, red lights flashing urgently in the hallway beyond. That would be security noticing your absence, the man sighed. I had hoped for more time. For what? Jason asked, edging toward the exit on the far side of the chamber. To explain, the scientist said, nodding toward Jason's glasses. Yes, I know you're streaming. That's why I didn't just have security haul you out. Why tell me anything at all? Jason asked, suspicion mixing with confusion. Because it wants me to, the man said, gesturing toward the glowing entity. It's been waiting for someone like you. Before Jason could respond, the entity pulsed with brilliant light, nearly blinding him. Jason! The feed's glitching! Maya's voice cried through the earpiece, panic clear in her tone. The object began spinning rapidly, its membrane turning transparent to reveal strange, intricate structures inside, part organic, part technology, beyond human understanding. What's happening? Jason demanded. Contact, the scientist whispered in awe. It's never done this before. A sharp, piercing tone echoed through the chamber, forcing Jason to clutch his ears. Then, impossibly, a voice spoke inside his head. Not in English, or any language he recognized, but perfectly clear. You have found us at last. Maya, are you getting this? Jason gasped, barely audible over the high-pitched sound filling the room. The audio's distorted, she replied, panic rising. Viewer count just exploded, over 20,000 now, but the feed keeps glitching. The entity pulsed with growing intensity, casting strange, shifting shadows around the chamber. The scientist stood frozen, eyes wide, making no move to interfere. We have waited, the voice continued inside Jason's mind, through cycles of your star, waiting for one who would see. See what? Jason whispered aloud, unsure if the entity required him to speak. The truth between worlds. The scientist hurried to a console, fingers flying over the keys, eyes shining with excitement. It's never communicated this clearly before, he muttered, almost to himself. Not in 75 years of study. Security alarms still blared outside, but no guards had appeared. Jason glanced nervously at the doors, then back to the glowing form. What are you? The entity's appendages extended outward, tracing a complex geometric pattern in the air. The temperature dropped sharply, frost forming on Jason's eyebrows and lashes. We are observers, collectors of knowledge, travelers between possibilities. Aliens, Jason breathed, his voice trembling with awe and fear. No, the voice corrected. Not alien, not foreign, not from some distant star. We have always been here, hiding in the spaces between what you perceive as reality. Jason stood frozen, heart hammering. The scientist beside him let out a soft, knowing laugh. That's exactly what we've been trying to tell the higher-ups for decades, he said, voice low, laced with a strange mixture of relief and dread. They're not from another planet. They're from another dimension, one that intersects with ours. The entity pulsed with light, a slow rhythm that Jason instinctively felt as agreement. Your kind perceives only 3 dimensions, it said, its voice echoing directly in Jason's mind, sometimes a rare few glimpse a 4th. But we exist in many more. Jason swallowed, his voice barely a whisper. And you've been here since 1947. A part of us manifested then, the voice replied. When your weapon tore holes in the boundaries between states of being, nuclear testing, the scientist muttered. The Trinity test, and the ones that followed. They created quantum disturbances we still don't fully understand. Jason's thoughts raced. His stomach turned. So Roswell, it wasn't a spacecraft crash. Not a crash. the scientist confirmed. A breach. A point where something broke through. Dimensional incursion. Jason turned toward his headset. Maya, he said quietly, are you hearing this? Partially, her voice crackled through. The signal's getting weak. But Jason, something else is happening. There's chatter on emergency channels, military mobilizations, something big. Jason's chest tightened. He looked at the scientist. Why now? Why talk to me? The man shook his head. I don't know. It's never responded to us before. It lets us observe. We test. It watches. But never this. Because you are the messenger, the voice said to Jason. The one who will share the truth. Jason's blood ran cold. Through my channel, he murmured. My followers, my live stream. Awareness spreads, makes the barriers thinner. The entity's glow surged, brightening until it painted the chamber walls in violet and electric blue. Then shapes formed in the light, symbols, spirals, intricate geometries. Jason didn't recognize them, but he understood them. Somehow. It's showing me something, he whispered. Equations, models, dimensions folding into each other, predictions. The scientist stepped closer, his face bathed in the strange glow. What does it mean? He asked, half to Jason, half to the being. Your weapons tear reality again, the voice answered. Not with force, but with observation. You watch, you change what is. The scientist muttered, quantum, observation. But on a macro scale, the light dimmed slightly, and a chill passed through the air. The sky darkens, the entity continued. Through the tears, they come. Jason stiffened. Who? Who comes through? The entity didn't answer. Instead, it filled Jason's mind with visions, stars blinking out, shadows moving silently across the void. Vast shapes swimming through dimensions his brain couldn't fully process. Not creatures, presences, older than galaxies. Oh my God, Jason gasped. Others, not like you. They do not observe, the voice said, slower now. They consume. The scientist went pale. It's trying to warn us. Warn us about what? Jason's voice cracked. A deeper alarm blared. This wasn't the same one that had gone off earlier. This one felt final. Lights bathed the room in pulsing, red, unfamiliar symbols flashing across the control panels. They're initiating containment protocols, the scientist said, panicked. Full facility lockdown. Jason backed up. Because of me? No, the man said darkly, eyes fixed on the shifting entity. Because of that. The entity began to change. Its glowing membrane rippled like disturbed water, and the serene hues of violet and blue flickered, flashed, then warped into a deep, violent crimson. The voice inside Jason's head broke apart, shattered as if splintering under pressure. Too late, it said. Tear, already opening. They sense me. They come. Jason, Maya's voice cut in, static-filled and broken. Something's jamming every frequency. The stream's dying. I'm losing. The entity convulsed, its appendages flailing erratically. One of them lashed through a nearby console. Sparks flew. The screen shorted out. It's phase shifting, the scientist said, backing away fast. Losing cohesion with our reality. The chamber doors burst open. Armed figures rushed in, heavily armored, masked, not regular military. Their suits were thick, lined with tubing, marked with strange insignia Jason didn't recognize. On the ground, one of them barked. Jason didn't move. He slowly raised his hands, heart racing, but stayed standing, eyes locked on the entity that had just told him everything. And not nearly enough. People need to know what's happening here, Jason said, voice tight, eyes flicking toward the camera embedded in his glasses. Thousands are watching right now. Not anymore, the lead operative snapped. His tone was clipped, unyielding. All outgoing signals from this facility have been cut. Jason turned to the scientist. The man nodded slowly, his expression grim. "They're telling the truth," he said. Jason's jaw clenched. "It doesn't matter. The stream was mirrored through multiple nodes, decentralized relays. You can't delete what's already out there." As if in response, the entity let out a sharp, high-pitched whine that pierced the air like a blade. The armed personnel flinched, some raising their hands to their helmets. The overhead lights flickered violently, and for a second, the room shimmered, like looking through the air above burning asphalt. "Tell them," the voice whispered inside. Jason's mind, weak now, fragile like a radio signal on the verge of breaking. The sky has changed. The stars move. "They come." "Sir," one of the suited figures said, turning to the scientist. "Project Overthrow has been greenlit. You need to come with us." The scientist's face drained of all color. His voice was barely audible. "That protocol hasn't been activated since 1979. "What's Project Overthrow?" Jason asked, breath shallow. The scientist turned to him. "A full-dimensional reset," he said. "They'll try to sever the link, force the connection closed." Jason stared at the entity, now flickering wildly, its edges bleeding into the air around it as if it were burning out of reality. "And what happens to that?" Jason asked, pointing toward it. The scientist looked at the form, which was rapidly destabilizing. "It gets pushed back, along with anything else that doesn't belong in this reality." Jason's stomach dropped. The implication hit like a hammer. He raised a hand to his earpiece, speaking low. "Maya, if you can still hear me, download everything. Save the footage. Spread it. Burn it into the internet." No answer, just static. The soldiers moved in, surrounding him with practiced precision, rifles raised. "Jason Reeve," the lead operative said in a cold, formal voice. "You are being detained under National Security Directive 133. Surrender all recording devices. Now." Jason didn't move. Before anyone could grab him, the entity released a final soul-rattling scream. The sound wasn't just audible. It was inside their minds, inside their bones. Everyone in the room collapsed to their knees, clutching their heads. "Remember." The voice echoed faintly in Jason's mind. "The sky used to be bluer." Jason's vision began to darken. As he slumped forward, the last thing he saw was the entity folding inward on itself, warping into a tight spiral of light and shadow, like a miniature black hole, bending the space around it into impossible shapes. Then, blackness. Maya Torres sat in her darkened apartment, the glow of monitors painting her face in shifting blues and greens. Empty coffee cups cluttered her desk. Her eyes were rimmed with dark circles, bloodshot from lack of sleep. She hadn't left her chair in almost a day. The stream had cut out 73 minutes after Jason entered the restricted site. She'd watched the footage dozens of times, the collapse of the entity, the armed men, Jason falling. Over 50,000 people had seen it before the feed died. Then the denials started. Government spokespeople dismissed it as a fabricated hoax. Social media sites flagged the clips, then purged them. Algorithms buried them. Journalists wouldn't touch the story. News anchors gave practiced chuckles about internet pranks. Maya's mirrors of the stream were taken down faster each time she uploaded. Her inbox flooded with copyright strikes and policy violations. But no matter how fast they deleted them, new versions popped up. Clips on obscure forums, fragments shared through private servers, watermarked screen recordings re-uploaded under different titles. She'd spent the first day trying to reach Jason. His phone rang once, then went dead. His email bounced back. His socials vanished. She even tried calling Desert Valley Logistics, but got nothing but pre-recorded menu trees and dead ends. It was like Jason Reeve had never existed. She stared at her main screen. Frame-by-frame analysis of the final minutes played on a loop. Jason collapsing. the entity's implosion, the eerie ripple in the space around it. No special effects team could have created that in real time. This wasn't CGI. This was something else. Her phone buzzed. Another takedown notice, the third in an hour. This one from a tiny video platform based in Eastern Europe. "They can't erase it all," she muttered under her breath, the same phrase she'd repeated endlessly over the past 72 hours. Too many people saw. A knock at the door made her jump. She froze. No one was supposed to know where she lived. She hadn't told anyone. Heart pounding, she stood and crossed to the door quietly, barefoot. She looked through the peephole. A delivery person stood there, holding a small, unmarked package. False skies. "Delivery for Torres," a voice called out from behind the door. Maya froze. She wasn't expecting anything. Heart tapping an uneasy rhythm, she approached the door and peeked through the peephole. A man in a generic courier uniform stood in the hallway, holding a small padded envelope and a digital signature pad. "I didn't order anything," she said, keeping her voice cautious. The man shrugged slightly, as if he'd had this conversation before. "Just doing my job, ma'am. Need a signature." She hesitated, then slowly unlatched the top lock and opened the door just enough for the security chain to keep it firmly shut. He held the envelope up so she could read the label. No return address, just her name in bold block letters, Maya Torres. She sighed, reached through the gap, signed the pad with a trembling hand, and took the envelope. Without saying another word, she shut the door, latched it again, and locked every bolt. Standing in her silent apartment, she stared at the package. Something felt off. The envelope was light, ordinary, but her instincts screamed otherwise. With deliberate care, she opened it. Inside was a single USB drive, plain, black, unmarked. She stared at it for a long minute, heart sinking into her stomach. Maya carried the drive over to her isolation rig, a standalone desktop never connected to the internet, used only to inspect suspicious files. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she inserted the USB stick. The machine whirred softly, running a full scan. Nothing flagged. No viruses, no malware, just one file. Final.mp3 Maya hesitated, then clicked it open. A burst of static filled the room. Then a voice, cracked, distant, familiar. "Maya, if you're hearing this, the dead man's switch worked." Her chest tightened. "Jason, I don't know what happened after they took me. I don't know if I'm still alive. But I need you to understand what I learned." His voice, once confident and sharp, was broken, filtered through layers of distortion, as if trying to reach her from another world. She sank into her chair, eyes already welling with tears. "They showed me things, Maya. The entity, whatever they really are. I saw glimpses, not dreams, not hallucinations, whole other dimensions, places that shouldn't exist. And they weren't just showing me. They were using me, using us." Jason's voice cracked with emotion. "They need awareness to spread. That's the key. They don't care if people believe the full story. Just fragments, tiny pieces scattered everywhere. That's how it begins. That's how they begin." Maya covered her mouth, struggling to breathe. The room suddenly felt colder. You'll hear people say it was fake, that the footage was staged, but thousands saw the stream. They know, and that's enough. That's all the entity ever needed. Not one person knowing everything, just millions knowing a little. Collective awareness. The recording buzzed, distorted again. "I don't think I'm coming back, Maya. I saw what's on the other side. It's not a place you can return from, but you have to keep fighting. Keep sharing what we found." Another pause. Then, watch. The sky. That's where it begins. The color is shifting. Slowly, subtly. People won't notice, but it used to be bluer. The audio ended in a harsh burst of static. Then silence. Maya sat motionless, staring at the empty screen. Jason's voice echoed in her mind, his urgency, his fear, his absolute certainty. She wiped her face, cleared her throat, and stood. Within minutes, she was on her main computer, creating new accounts, drafting encrypted messages, uploading screenshots, fragments of their research, clues from Jason's journals, pieces that, on their own, meant little, but together painted something dark, vast, and terrifying. Her phone buzzed, screen lighting up with notifications, texts from fellow researchers, tweets, encrypted chat requests. Was it real? Where's Jason? Are we too late? There were no easy answers, but there was clarity. Jason had lit a match. Now it was her job to keep the fire burning. Outside her window, the day had slipped into twilight. A pale, washed out sky hovered above the skyline. She stared at it for a long time. Had it always looked like this? Her computer pinged again. More shares, more uploads, people she'd never met reposting Jason's stream, talking about the shift, sharing photos of the sky, whispering about the Antiti. The story had taken root. Jason Reeves was gone, but what he started was spreading, unstoppable now. That one final message had cracked something open in the minds of thousands. They were seeing things, questioning the sky, wondering what lurked just beyond their perception. And once you start asking those kinds of questions, there's no going back. Promo voiceover excerpt, False Skies trailer, False Skies. A conspiracy thriller unraveling the government's darkest deception, and the whistleblower who cracked it open. It began with the worst terror attack in modern history, an event the public believed was unforeseen, but it wasn't. It was planned, deliberately orchestrated to launch endless wars, justify surveillance, and funnel trillions into a growing military-industrial web. 20 years later, a former FBI data analyst named Thomas Keane leaks classified files, documents pointing to a betrayal so monstrous it shatters the public's trust in everything they thought they knew. Now, hunted by an elite Black Ops unit tasked with burying the truth forever, Keane must outrun a government built to erase him and broadcast a reality that could reshape the post-attack world order. The truth can't be unseen. False Skies, coming soon. If your eyelids grow heavy as you read, don't worry. That's perfectly fine. This story was never meant to be rushed. It's dense, full of layers, meant to linger in your mind, like the hum of an old monitor in a dark room. Maybe you'll drift off mid-sentence, lulled by the quiet horror of how fear can be manufactured and sold. Or maybe you'll stay wide, awake, caught in the details, chasing the truth all the way to its jagged end. Either way, let's begin. Breathe. Let the world outside your window fade. Picture a desk stacked with redacted files, a flickering screen running decades-old surveillance footage, and the dusty smell of institutional secrets long buried. This is False Skies, told in 5 parts, each a rung lower into a maze designed not just to deceive, but to endure. Listen closely. The most damning truths rarely scream. They whisper from the margins of official documents. Thomas Keane didn't feel like a revolutionary the day he pressed send. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just a man cracking under the weight of truth. A man who couldn't sleep without seeing the footage, without hearing the names of the dead. He sat alone in a rundown roadside motel, yellowed curtains, humming air conditioner, faded wallpaper curling at the edges. The place smelled like burnt coffee and loneliness. His laptop was old, the trackpad chipped, the battery bloated. But it worked, and it had Wi-Fi. On the screen, a folder labeled Black, Dust, Zip. Inside it, decades of guilt, hundreds of documents, FBI memos, encrypted internal messages, insurance records, training exercise logs, files he'd copied one by one over the years, things he wasn't supposed to keep, patterns no one in power wanted noticed. With his breath shallow and palms slick with sweat, Keane double-checked the VPN chain, reconfirmed the secure channel to an overseas drop site, one used by journalists known for publishing secrets other outlets wouldn't touch. His finger hovered over the mouse. He typed a short message. For the ones we lost. For the ones they lied. Then he clicked send. The upload bar filled. It was done. Within the hour, black dust was in the hands of 3 independent journalists and one global outlet notorious for confronting state narratives. Editors scrambled to authenticate the material. A slow current of anxiety spread through their newsroom as they cross-checked dates, stamps, even watermarks. The tone in the room shifted. Not another crackpot dump. This was different. By nightfall, headlines appeared, cautious, almost apologetic. Unverified leak, allegedly exposes insider role in historic attack. Documents may suggest advanced knowledge. By intelligence agencies, disclaimers followed in bold. May, alleged. Potentially fabricated. But some readers saw more than speculation. They saw connections they'd long suspected finally laid bare. One memo outlined a meeting months before the attack where officials debated the need for a unifying catastrophic event. Another referenced insurance adjustments on specific high-risk floors of a certain tower. Policies expanded mere days before impact. Training logs for a multi-agency wargame eerily overlapped with the real-world event, including identical targets and timing. One email bluntly stated, "The window for maximum psychological effect closes soon." Keane watched the media fallout from that same motel, curled on the end of the bed, the TV screen casting blue light over the walls. A news anchor stammered through the developing story. The White House has issued a statement calling the leak foreign disinformation and warned against spreading unverified files. Keane smiled bitterly. There it is, he thought. The denial phase. Predictable as clockwork. Next would come the manhunt. He closed the laptop, stuffed it into a worn backpack, and zipped it shut. He checked the room one last time, unplugged the cheap lamp to avoid fingerprints, and walked out without looking back. Years earlier, Thomas Keane had joined the FBI's data analysis division with idealism and purpose. Numbers made sense to him. Patterns told the truth, even when people lied. He spent nearly a decade analyzing anomalies, surveillance gaps, communication inconsistencies, financial trails. He hadn't been looking for a conspiracy, but over time, pieces began to stick together like fragments of a burnt photograph. The same private defense contractors always profiting. The same politicians pushing agendas that aligned too perfectly with classified recommendations. The same stock market anomalies, spikes in put options and short sales. Days before the event, he'd gone numb trying to file internal reports. His superiors either ignored him or subtly discouraged further digging, so he stopped reporting and started archiving. Patiently, quietly. He waited for the day he could no longer look away. At Langley, Fort Meade, and beyond, black dust set off, alarm bells. Within hours, the leak triggered protocols at a shadow agency known only to a handful of elected officials. A division not listed on budgets. No official name, just the initials. OSD, Office of Strategic Deterrence. At its helm sat Eldridge Shaw, a man whose name never appeared in the media, whose face had never testified before Congress. He read the leak's summary in silence, face expressionless. Then he spoke calmly to the men in the room. Find Keane, bury this. Quietly, Shaw knew that truth was the most dangerous contagion of all. Not because people instantly believed it, but because it lingered. It raised questions. Once a citizen asked, "What if it's true?" The official narrative started to crack. He couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not after 2 decades of carefully shaped history. The war, the agencies, the profits, the power, All of it could collapse if people believed a data analyst over their government. Thomas Keane had to be turned into a cautionary tale, and so it began. The containment plan, quiet arrests, pressure on journalists, discredit campaigns seeded online, leaked mental health records, claims that Keane had ties to foreign governments, that he doctored the files, that he was suicidal. But truth has a strange resilience. Even buried in doubt, even cloaked in misinformation, some facts glowed like embers in ash. The insurance logs, the training overlaps, the internal discussions using phrases like acceptable, loss window, and unifying trauma vector. And somewhere in a dozen countries, mirrors of black dust had already been copied and stored by civilians, archivists, rogue coders. The files were spreading, too late to stop now. So, dear reader, whether your eyes grow heavy or your heart races faster, remember this. Not all revolutions begin with a shout. Some start in silence, in a motel room, with a file named Black Dust. By midnight, major intelligence agencies had flagged Thomas Keane as a suspected hacker and a possible domestic threat. His name was suddenly all over internal bulletins, red-stamped with urgency. FBI teams scrambled to trace digital footprints, pulling surveillance footage from around their own headquarters, hoping for a glimpse of him. Inside a dim office, lined with muted computer monitors, Director Shaw made a tense call to an old contact at one of the top media conglomerates. His voice was calm but clipped. "Don't run the story." "Not yet," he said. There was no argument. Within minutes, the airwaves shifted. Major news stations gave the story only a passing mention, burying it under chatter about celebrity scandals and overseas conflicts. But it was too late. The internet had already cracked open. The hashtag Black Dust was trending by dawn. Amateur sleuths flooded forums and threads, analyzing every line of the leaked memos. A few digital analysts began cross-referencing IP addresses found in the documents. What they discovered sent ripples through the community. Several IPs were linked to known government servers, including subdomains associated with internal intelligence branches. The implications were staggering. If the documents were real, they suggested that elements within the US government had foreseen and perhaps even enabled a terror attack, one that resulted in catastrophic civilian casualties, all for political leverage. The term false skies caught fire. People began to describe the illusion of safety and truth as nothing more than a painted ceiling, an artificial sky meant to hide the real architects behind decades of war and fear. By evening, crowds had gathered outside federal buildings in New York, D.C., Chicago, and San Francisco. The protests started small, handmade signs, chants for accountability, but the fury was palpable. The government issued a sterile statement. The documents were fake, the work of foreign adversaries designed to destabilize trust, but that only fanned the flames. Hacktivist groups, notorious for their anti-establishment leanings, released their own threats online. In dark corners of the web, masked avatars posted warnings, "Release the truth or we'll release more." Behind the scenes, the financial world trembled. Stocks tied to military contractors nosedived as rumors swirled about past insider dealings, connections between certain corporations and high-ranking officials during wartime. Keane sat in silence, hundreds of miles away, hidden in a friend's unused hunting cabin buried deep in the woods. It was cold. Dust lingered in the air, and the only light came from a cheap battery-powered lamp. He had no internet, just a radio and the eerie whisper of the trees at night. He listened to the crackle of news through static, catching words like traitor, whistleblower, and security breach. His stomach turned. They were painting him as a radical, a threat to national safety. The next morning, it was official. His name and face were splashed across the FBI's press conference. Primary suspect in a massive leak of classified information, the spokesperson declared. Believed to be acting alone. Dangerous. Unstable. None of his former co-workers spoke publicly. Many were afraid. But in private, some whispered their doubts. They knew Keane. They knew he was meticulous, always buried in data, always questioning anomalies others ignored. One name stood out from the noise: Sarah Voss. She was a journalist once celebrated for her tenacity, now blacklisted after challenging the official narrative surrounding 9/11. Her face hadn't been on television in years, but within independent circles, she was still known. Smart, sharp, dangerous to the wrong people. When Sarah read the leaked files, her heart skipped. The phrasing, the structure, even the formatting, they matched fragments she'd seen before. Fragments she'd only been shown in whispered conversations by frightened insiders years ago. She logged onto the encrypted forum where the files had surfaced. After a few tense minutes, she typed a message. "I can help verify. Let me talk to the source." The message was picked up by one of Keen's few remaining contacts, someone he trusted from years back. It made its way to him through layers of secure relays. Keen read her message twice. He hesitated. Could he trust her? If he did, there was no going back. But the world was already tilting, and someone like Sarah might be the only chance he had. To set things right, he typed a careful, coded response. "Let's talk. Soon." The clock had started. Keen knew he had a narrow window. If they could get hard evidence, verifiable truth, to the public through someone credible, someone the system had already cast out, the whole house of cards might come down. But the machine he was up against was massive, cold, and ruthless, built to protect itself, and it would not hesitate to crush anyone threatening the illusion. 2 days after the leak, the country was in chaos. The government repeated its stance. The black dust documents were fake, part of a foreign campaign to destabilize national trust. But smaller outlets had started running detailed comparisons. They showed that the digital formatting, file signatures, metadata trails, classification stamps, lined up with real CIA and FBI templates. It was too precise to be coincidence. Now the public was split. Some believed entirely, others panicked, clinging to the safety of the official story. But no one could deny something had cracked. A long-held illusion was breaking apart. Thomas Keen was now the most wanted man in America. Once he'd just been a mid-level data analyst, quiet, methodical, the kind of guy who preferred numbers to politics. But even back then, in the years before 9/11, he'd noticed things, reports that didn't add up, intelligence summaries that contradicted themselves, orders to bury certain anomalies without explanation. He never said much, just took notes, filed things away. Now it was all boiling to the surface, and with Sarah Voss on the other end of the line, the truth was no longer something he could keep in a folder. It was a storm coming for everyone. The day Thomas Keen quietly walked out of the bureau, no one suspected the truth, that for nearly a year he'd been copying archived files, documents scheduled to be sealed away forever. He'd done it methodically, without raising alarms. A ghost in the system he once helped maintain. Now, with his name in headlines, his former supervisors told the press he was mentally unstable, someone who drifted into conspiracy theories and isolation. What they didn't say was that years earlier, Keen had raised legitimate concerns. He had flagged unusual patterns, conflicting intelligence reports, suspicious financial links, and for a brief moment, those concerns had sparked internal inquiries. That is, until the higher-ups stepped in and quietly buried them. On a quiet cul-de-sac just outside Washington, a black SUV pulled up to a modest home. Inside sat a man in his 50s, a data engineer who had once shared a cubicle row with Keen. 4 men in plain dark suits stepped out of the vehicle. No badges, no words wasted. They knocked once, hard, before pushing their way inside. "Open your computer," one of them said flatly. The man stammered, trying to protest, but was met with cold stares and veiled threats. Within minutes, they were combing through his emails, search history, and chat logs. They seized anything that mentioned Thomas, black dust, or encrypted file transfers. No warrant, no paperwork. This wasn't law enforcement in the traditional sense. These men answered to something else. A covert domestic counterintelligence unit tied loosely to the Black Archive, a shadowy group rumored to serve the shared interests of government and corporate power. What happened at this house happened in others too. Former FBI techs, analysts, and anyone who might have ever shared coffee or data with Keane. They were the Watchers. Above them all stood Director Eldridge Shaw. From a high-rise government tower with mirrored glass and biometric locks, he monitored the operation. Shaw had climbed fast through the ranks after 9/11, riding the wave of fear and national security expansion. He had helped draft parts of the Patriot Act. He had dined with defense contractors and spoken at black tie surveillance summits. To him, the leaked files weren't just dangerous, they were heretical. This can't be allowed to spiral, he told his top aides. Reeve, Keane, whatever name he's using, must be found. We cannot let fantasies unravel 20 years of progress. Meanwhile, Keane was a ghost again. He'd been living in the margins, skirting highway checkposts, swapping vehicles, paying only in cash. He knew how the surveillance net worked because he had helped build parts of it. License plate scanners, facial recognition cameras, flagged bank activity. He stayed ahead of all of it. He ate from gas station shelves, slept in budget motels under false names. He shaved differently, wore sunglasses even at dusk. Every door, creak, every unfamiliar car, every cough in the night set his heart racing. The paranoia wasn't a delusion. It was the cost of truth. Sarah Voss finally reached him through an encrypted chat app. The message blinked on his burner phone, plain and direct. We need to meet. In person. I can verify the files properly. I still have reach in the independent media world. But we're running out of time. Keane stared at the message for a long time. A meeting was dangerous. Physical surveillance couldn't be spoofed the way digital signals could, but without verification from someone like Sarah, the documents would remain in limbo, dismissed as hoaxes by the public and forgotten in the fog of internet noise. They agreed on a location, a small public library in a sleepy coastal town, long after closing hours. Quiet, off the grid. The next afternoon, Keane parked a few blocks away. As he approached on foot, he saw a sedan idling across the lot. No markings, tinted windows, engine still running. He slowed, turned away casually, walked the block. It didn't follow, just nerves, maybe, or maybe someone was watching. Inside, the library smelled of old paper and wood polish. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly. Sarah Voss stood near the back stacks, tall and lean, her dark hair pulled into a loose bun. She wore a scuffed leather jacket and combat boots. Her eyes were sharp, cautious. "You're Thomas," she said quietly, offering a hand. "Glad you came." He nodded, gripping her hand with just enough pressure to hide the tremble. "I've seen what you posted," she said, lowering her voice, as they sat at a reading table near a wall of forgotten encyclopedias. "But I knew there had to be more. The official story. It's always had holes." He pulled a USB drive from the inside of his jacket, sliding it across the table like it was laced with explosives. "This is the full package," he whispered. "Memos about stand-down orders, defense contracts made days before the attacks, flight path manipulations, even emails labeling some hijackers as compromised assets. They weren't just missed, they were handled." His voice cracked on the SAR. Last word. He blinked fast, the weight of it all pressing in. They used the pain, the chaos, turned it into a machine. Endless war, endless control, and they're still doing it. Sarah swallowed hard. She plugged the drive into her encrypted laptop and scanned a few files. Her eyes widened. These references, bank transfers, offshore accounts. Operation Silence. Jesus. She sat back, stunned. This is bigger than I thought. Keane nodded. "If we just post it online, they'll smother it in seconds, say it's fake, say I'm a lunatic." Sarah thought for a moment, fingers tapping the table. "We need something louder," she said. Something they can't shut down without raising more eyebrows. A live reveal, a platform too big for them to black out. Or someone in mainstream journalism with just enough spine left to run it. She looked up at him. We're going to need help. Outside, the sedan was gone, or maybe just relocated. Inside, the truth sat between them, cold, dangerous, and ticking like a bomb. The sharp sound of a scuffle near the library's entrance jolted them both. Sarah froze, fingers hovering over the laptop's keyboard. A shadowy figure in dark clothing stood at the glass door, motionless, watching. Someone's there, Keane whispered. Without a word, Sarah shut the laptop and slid it into her bag. They moved fast and low, ducking behind a row of old bookshelves. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, slow but deliberate. Keane held his breath, heart hammering. But then, an unexpected voice broke the tension. Evening, folks. Didn't know anyone was still in here, came the hoarse call of the library's elderly caretaker as he shuffled into view, oblivious to the tension. Keane peered through a gap between the books. The dark figure outside was still watching, on just for a moment, then turned and disappeared into the night. Sarah exhaled. Could have been nothing, she said, voice low. Or someone checking if we're really here, Keane replied. Neither of them felt safe. They left quickly, agreeing to meet again in 48 hours near a large city. Their plan was bold: break into a local news station and push out the truth before it could be buried. It was risky. If the Watchers caught wind of it, they wouldn't just come to stop them. They'd come to kill. That night, Keane's phone vibrated. A message lit up the screen. A contact he hadn't heard from in months. Someone who had once helped him decipher old FA logs. One of our guys is dead. Boat accident. They're picking us off. Then nothing. Keane stared at the message, chills crawling up his spine. The Watchers weren't just monitoring anymore. They were eliminating. Anyone who could verify the leak, anyone who had touched the documents, was now a target. The streets outside erupted with unrest. Protesters filled intersections, some demanding answers, others warning against fueling conspiracy. Rumors swirled. The government had known about the disaster before it happened. Some called that offensive. Others believed silence was more dangerous than outrage. The administration responded with escalating rhetoric. On national television, Director Shaw's face appeared, grey-suited, expression cold. Those spreading lies and sowing chaos will be brought to justice, he said, no matter who they are. But while Shaw spun the narrative, Sarah found something buried deep in the documents, faint references to something called the Saturn Files. Not just names and theories, an actual ledger, financial records tracking the flow of money from emergency budgets into the pockets of private war contractors, oil giants, and political operatives. This isn't speculation anymore, Sarah told Keane during one of their hurried meetups in a borrowed safe house. This is a paper trail. If we find it, we can show what really happened after the attack, why they let it happen. The ledger, if it existed, could shatter the official story. But time was against them. Helicopters thudded over highways at night. Police checkpoints sprang up in random places. Motel lobbies had new security cameras. Keane started changing disguises. Every day, hats, glasses, new clothes from thrift stores. He never stayed in one place more than a few hours. He knew what this meant. The government feared the leak might be real, and that fear made them dangerous. But the Watchers were growing more aggressive. They deployed a Black Ops unit, not just surveillance anymore, but armed retrieval teams, kill teams. Keane had to move faster. If he didn't, the last threads of truth would be buried forever. If he succeeded, the entire post-attack regime might come crashing down. Each night, Keane and Sarah pored over decrypted files in silence, the glow of the screen flickering against tired faces. They began to piece it together, snippets in old CIA memos, data fragments tied to an outdated archive. The Saturn files weren't just a myth, they were real. and likely still stored at a shuttered NSA facility deep in the southwestern desert, long thought abandoned. Keane rubbed his eyes. You really think the files are still there? Sarah nodded. These memos mention tape backups, stuff too sensitive to digitize completely. Offline storage, Keane said. Smart, but risky for us. We find the archive. We get the raw files. That's the smoking gun, Sarah whispered. They had barely any gear. A beat-up sedan, a few thousand in cash, 3 burner phones, 2 half-functioning laptops. The Watchers had military-grade surveillance, satellite support, and access to every traffic cam in the country. But maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't expect an attack on a forgotten facility no one had touched in years. That was their edge. Surprise. Back in the capital, Director Shaw tightened the grip. News channels ran footage of violent protests, blaming them on misinformation. A new headline flashed across every screen. Rogue ex-FBI analyst linked to foreign intelligence plot. Keane watched it on a motel TV, fingers clenched. They're branding me a traitor, he muttered. Sarah looked at him, her voice steady. Then let's give them a reason to fear us. They turned the TV off. There was no time left to doubt. The next steps could change everything, or end them both. Many people believed the official narrative, but a growing number started questioning it, especially after a string of so-called accidents took out people connected to the leak. The deaths didn't feel random, not to the ones paying attention. If it's all fake, people whispered online, why are they killing everyone who gets close to it? The unease turned into outrage after a well-known data archivist was found dead, shot in his own home. The news reported it as a failed robbery. But those in the know weren't buying it. He had been one of the few who'd openly backed the leak's authenticity. His death wasn't a coincidence. Social media erupted. Hashtags demanding justice trended for days. In city squares, crowds held homemade signs that read, "We deserve the truth and stop killing our whistleblowers." The Watchers struck back hard. Police units stormed protest sites, dragging people away under charges of inciting riots. The message was clear. Dissent would be crushed. Public opinion splintered. Some still clung to what they were told, but more began to wonder what exactly was being hidden so violently. Meanwhile, Thomas Keane tried to stay laser-focused. The more he pieced things together, the more he was convinced. If the Saturn files were legit, they'd show financial transactions that directly linked corporate boardrooms to government officials. Bank wires tied to emergency legislation passed after the attack. Billions funneled into endless war, all enabled by a staged catastrophe. No wonder they're stopping at nothing, Sarah muttered one night as she stared out the window of yet another motel room. With fake IDs and burner phones, they travelled by back roads, skirting major highways. Every motel stay was paid in cash. They never used the same name twice. They stayed alert, paranoid, calculating how long before their faces were spotted by a camera or someone seeking the bounty. The atmosphere outside worsened daily. News anchors repeated government warnings on loop. Thomas Keane is armed and dangerous. If you see something, say something. Rewards for verified tips now at $500,000. Billboards with Keane's face appeared on rural roads. He kept his head down, wearing a worn baseball cap and dark glasses, but the anxiety was constant. Every glance from a passerby felt like suspicion. Every sound, a possible tale. One afternoon, while driving a quiet stretch of cracked 2-lane road, Sarah noticed the SUV in the mirror. "We've got company," she said. Keane twisted in his seat. The black SUV was closing in fast, hugging the lane with practiced precision. It wasn't just someone passing by. "Hang on," Sarah said, veering sharply off the main road onto a dirt path that cut through farmland. The SUV followed. The chase kicked up clouds of dust. A shot rang out, then another. The car jolted as a tire blew. Sarah fought the wheel, but it was no use. They skidded off the path and into a shallow ditch. "Out! Now!" Keane shouted. They scrambled into the nearby cornfield. crashing through the tall stalks. The watchers searched on foot, voices low and urgent, flashlights slicing through the crops. But after a tense 15 minutes, the pursuers pulled back. The risk of a gunfight in open daylight was too high. They disappeared, tires crunching, back onto the road. Keen and Sarah stayed hidden until nightfall. As they limped back to the car, Sarah's voice was hoarse. If they're that desperate to stop us, we're obviously close. 2 days later, under a blood-orange sky, they reached the outskirts of the abandoned NSA facility. Rusted fencing, collapsed signposts, and overgrown weeds hinted at years of neglect. The place looked forgotten, but to them, it was sacred ground. A final lead. They parked behind a ridge and approached on foot. Near the fence's edge, a gap had been cut open, probably by looters years ago. They slipped through and crossed the lot in silence. The main building loomed like a mausoleum, windows boarded, the concrete walls cracked from years of sun and wind. A lone coyote howled in. The distance, the wind whistled eerily through open vents, carrying a metallic tang. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Their flashlights revealed a sea of dust-coated cubicles and overturned chairs. Office plants, long dead, still sat in cracked plastic pots. Keen stepped around a half-burned coffee cup and scanned the hall. In the basement, they found it, a server sublevel. Rows of old computer racks lined the room, some dark, others faintly beeping. A few still drew power from emergency backups. "There's still juice down here," Keen muttered, frowning. "That's not right." Sarah knelt beside a locked steel door, marked Server Vault Archive 6. She pulled up a partial decryption key from the documents they'd recovered and input it into her phone. "Generating bypass sequence," she whispered. After several failed tries, a low mechanical click echoed in the hall. A green light flickered. The vault creaked open. Inside, the air was colder. Rows of drives and magnetic tape reels stood under dim blue lighting. Climate control was still active, minimal but functional. That meant someone had been accessing this space. They moved fast. "Here, look." Sarah pointed to a dusty server, rack marked with fading stencils. Operation Cast, Peak Post-Quar, Roster Saturn FSV. She powered up a terminal and connected their laptop. Keen watched as the boot screen lit up and a command prompt appeared. Restricted. Saturn database. Access level 123. Enter passcode. They tried variations, dates, names, code words from the documents. On the third attempt, a beep. Access granted. Directory scrolled down the screen. Funding transfers. Urgent authorizations. Emergency build-out contracts. Media coordination protocols. Trading logs. Class X. The files painted a chilling picture. Massive amounts of money had been moved within days of the attack. Defense contracts approved before the event even occurred. Buildings that hadn't been damaged, still demolished for security purposes. Journalists paid to push the official version, and insider trading logs showing enormous stock moves. Bets made on the disaster before it unfolded. Sarah stared at the screen, pale. This is it. Keen couldn't speak. The weight of it was too much. They had proof. Not just theory, not just suspicion. Real documents, transactions, names, dates. All of it. And now they just had to survive long enough to make it public. They planned the tragedy, Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen. To spread fear, push endless war budgets, feed the arms, industry, all hidden behind the curtain of national security. Keen stood over her shoulder, jaw clenched. The documents were undeniable. Some passages hinted that the hijackers had been known assets, used deliberately, like sparks to ignite a blaze. The betrayal hit like a gut punch. A creak overhead broke the silence. Footsteps. They were here. Sarah's breath caught. They've traced the power draw. Keane moved quickly. We need to back this up. Now. He connected multiple external drives, launching the data transfer as fast as the old server would allow. Sarah, heart pounding, killed the lights and crouched behind a steel cabinet, pistol in hand, a sharp crash upstairs. Then, the unmistakable beams of flashlights cut down the stairwell. They're rushing in. Get down! Keane hissed. Gunfire ripped through the gloom. Bullets clanged off metal racks and bit into concrete. Sarah ducked lower and fired back, squeezing off measured shots from her pistol. Her shoulder slammed against the console with each recoil. Keane didn't look up. His fingers danced over the keyboard, connecting the server to a portable router, bouncing the signal to a secure satellite link. The progress bar crawled, 10%, then 12%. The noise stopped suddenly, then heavy footsteps echoed. Director Shaw emerged from the smoke, his silhouette framed by the hallway's emergency lights. "Stop right now!" he thundered. His voice echoed with authority and fury. "You don't understand what you're playing with," he said, stepping closer. "You're unraveling a fabric that holds entire alliances together. That day, it's more complicated than you'll ever know." The gunfire resumed. Sarah cried out as a bullet grazed her shoulder, the impact spinning her sideways. Blood soaked into her sleeve, but she held her position, firing again to keep the watchers from flanking Keane. "Uploading 50%, Keane muttered, gritting his teeth. Shaw growled and signaled with a flick of his hand. A flashbang arced into the room. Boom! The world went white. Ears ringing, Sarah clutched her head, vision spinning. Before she could recover, hands grabbed her. She fought back, twisting, but a knee pinned her chest. Another agent slammed Keane to the ground. His laptop clattered across the floor, the screen cracking under a boot heel. The upload froze at 80%. Keane roared, wrenching an elbow free. He swung the shattered laptop like a brick, smashing it into the agent's face. The man reeled, blood flying. The laptop sparked, then buzzed back to life. The upload resumed. A watcher scrambled toward the server rack, trying to pull the cables. But a stray bullet struck a coolant pipe. It hissed violently, thick steam flooding the room. They all paused. Danger hung in the air. "This place is a bomb now," one of the watchers muttered. Shaw raised his gun, stepping over debris, aiming straight at Keane. "You can die clinging to your fantasy, or disappear quietly. Either way, no one will ever see the truth." But at that moment, boom! The damaged pipe burst. The room erupted in fire. Smoke and flame licked the walls, sending watchers diving for cover. Sarah crawled toward the doorway, coughing, one arm limp. Keane, battered and bleeding, blinked through the chaos. The progress bar hit 98%. He let out a guttural scream and slammed, his hand down on the keyboard. Upload complete. A high-pitched beep confirmed it. Shaw's eyes widened. "No!" The agents turned in panic. One, furious, raised his weapon and fired. A deafening shot cracked through the server room. Keane's body collapsed, limp. The upload cable was yanked, but the data had already left, dispersed to cloud nodes, mirrored across hidden networks. It was unstoppable now. Alarms wailed. The fire grew, swallowing walls and electronics. The heat melted plastic, twisted metal. The watchers were forced to retreat, dragging their wounded and Director Shaw away. As they pulled out, another blast rocked the building. The entire underground facility began to collapse. Dust and flame consumed everything. No one saw Keane again. But his mission was complete. By morning, the world had changed. The Saturn files exploded. Online, activists, archivists, rogue journalists, everyone had them. Anonymous servers mirrored the data. No amount of takedown requests could contain it. Governments scrambled to respond. Within the leaked folders were operations with code names like White Door and Switchboard Commission for Filter. Meticulous breakdowns of backroom deals, staged, events and intelligence agencies working hand in hand with extremist factions. Documents showed that the attacks had been engineered to create chaos and justify military campaigns. Emails and memos revealed high-ranking officials discussing acceptable civilian losses as trade-offs for long-term strategic positioning. Crowds took to the streets. Massive protests erupted across major cities: New York, Berlin, London, Tokyo, Paris. Chants demanded accountability, cabinet resignations, independent investigations. Allies called emergency meetings. The UN was flooded with requests for international inquiries. Rival nations used the moment to spotlight US hypocrisy. Inside the White House, press secretaries called the documents doctored fictions, but the evidence spoke louder. Independent cybersecurity experts verified file hashes, metadata, and timestamps. They matched perfectly with 2-decade-old classified systems. Even some intelligence insiders came forward anonymously, voices cracking as they confirmed the files were real. "We didn't know how deep it went," one confessed. The intelligence community reeled. In its darkest hour, the institution built on secrecy now faced the light. The world, once held in manipulated silence, had started asking real questions. Back home in the US, the fallout was instant and explosive. By the next morning, angry crowds gathered outside major government buildings, waving signs that demanded accountability and arrests. Chants echoed through the streets of Washington, D.C., New York, and Los Angeles. Justice for the truth and no more lies. Lawsuits began piling up against board members of weapons manufacturing corporations named in the Saturn files. Shareholders dumped stock in droves. The defense sector tanked within days. CEOs vanished from public view. Some resigned under pressure, others quietly fled the country, hoping to escape the avalanche. Cable news split down the middle. A few mainstream anchors admitted they'd failed the public. One veteran reporter broke down live, apologizing for parroting government statements. For years, "We believed the briefings. We were wrong." Her confession went viral, but not everyone followed. Other networks doubled down, pushing nationalistic narratives, calling the Saturn files enemy disinformation. Ironically, that only fueled more suspicion and public fury. Disinformation clashed with documented truth in a daily storm, but the evidence was simply too massive to erase. "You can't shut the barn door after the horses have bolted," one commentator said grimly. "The entire post-9/11 world order is under review." Director Eldridge Shaw, visibly shaken, held a grand press conference to reassert government control. It backfired immediately. As he stepped to the podium, protesters drowned him in boos. Someone hurled a shoe. He flinched. Cameras rolled. The clip was replayed endlessly. As outrage grew, Congress was inundated with calls for emergency hearings. Shaw's office tried one last move, declaring a national security emergency and calling for martial law to preserve peace. But that only stoked the fire. Several state governors flatly refused to cooperate. National Guard units stood down. In some cities, even police departments held their own press briefings, vowing not to turn against citizens. The long-standing balance of power began to crack. Investigations sprang up from every corner. Congress, independent panels, civil rights coalitions. Ambitious new lawmakers launched probes into those who had exploited the 9/11 tragedy for money and influence. Quietly, names were added to watch lists, not by the government, but by a public now armed with truth. And then Sarah Voss reappeared. She was found alive in a remote patch of New Mexico scrubland, badly injured and dehydrated. But alive! Within days, she published an op-ed that electrified the country. One man's last keystroke. In it, she detailed what had happened inside the abandoned NSA facility, how the Watchers had invaded, how Thomas Keane had fought to the bitter end to finish the upload, how the gunfire roared around him as he made sure the Saturn files would be seen, how his blood had soaked the server room floor, but his mission had succeeded. The story struck a nerve. It went viral within hours. Keane was no longer just a rogue agent. He was a martyr, a tragic hero who had given everything so that the lies could finally die. At the local level, families of 9/11 victims demanded justice. Old government commissions were torn apart under scrutiny. Pages of sealed documents were finally unredacted, showing just how much had been deliberately hidden. Even former investigators admitted on camera that they had been misled, pressured, or outright threatened. People wept openly. It was as if the wound of 9/11 had been torn open all over again. This time, not by foreign terrorists, but by the bitter truth of betrayal. The emotional weight of it all was unbearable for many. Therapists, crisis lines, and community forums saw a massive uptick in activity. Entire cities paused to process the grief anew. How did we let this happen? One caller asked on a late-night radio show, how did fear become a business, and why didn't anyone stop it? Abroad, the ripple effects shattered old alliances. Nations that had supported the war on terror now accused Washington of deception. Some pulled troops out of disputed regions. Others launched their own investigations, suspecting complicity. Parliamentary hearings opened in London, Berlin, Ottawa, and Sydney. The post-9/11 world order, the network of surveillance, militarization, and perpetual war began to collapse. In its place, uncertainty. Some hoped this would lead to peace. Others feared it would create new openings for chaos and extremism. And in the middle of it all, strange rumors began to swirl. Sightings, whispers, grainy photos. Thomas Keane, alive. There were stories of a man matching his description seen in Patagonia or in a remote Nepalese village. None confirmed. Officials maintained he had died in the collapse, but no body had ever been recovered. Some believed he had faked his death. That, after giving the world the truth, he had chosen anonymity. 6 months passed, and then came the Senate hearing, a massive televised event. Dozens of former officials were subpoenaed, ex-generals, ex-CIA heads, retired CEOs, and cabinet members from 20 years ago. The American public watched, riveted. Some invoked national security, some pleaded the fifth, others, surprisingly, cracked. One former defense contractor admitted to manipulating intelligence reports to secure wartime contracts. A retired general confessed to ignoring whistleblower warnings. A former White House aide cried as she described shredding documents under direct orders. Indictments followed. Not all led to prison, but for the first time in decades, power was held to account. The justice system, long dismissed as toothless against the elite, finally bit back, at least symbolically. It wasn't perfect. Many guilty figures walked free, but the culture had changed. The era of blind acceptance was over. Meanwhile, Sarah Voss didn't stop. She launched Saraveos, an independent media platform focused solely on the Saturn files and its fallout. With a small, passionate team, she released daily updates, deep dives, and interviews under the banner, "No More False Skies." It became a new kind of newsroom, fiercely honest, fiercely independent. The truth, they promised, would never again be buried without a fight. People from all walks of life came forward, whistleblowers, ex-employees, grieving families. They offered up testimonies, leaked documents, even hand-scrawled letters describing the lies they'd lived under or witnessed firsthand. It was as if a long-held breath had finally been released. With her name finally cleared and the government's blacklist lifted, she stepped into the spotlight, not for fame, but for justice. She became a fierce voice demanding accountability, using her newfound platform to call out the secrets and silences that had harmed so many. Exactly 1 year after the collapse of the Saturn files, a memorial was quietly unveiled just a few blocks from where the 9/11 tragedy had once turned the world upside down. It wasn't grand or loud, just a solemn statue of a lone figure pressing a key on a keyboard. The image captured something intimate and powerful, the quiet courage of revealing truth. At its base, the words were carved in clean, sharp lines. They took truth from us in the shadows. He brought it back in the light. People came and went, some leaving flowers, others just standing there silently, letting the weight of it all settle. For many, it was a strange kind of closure, proof that someone had dared to pull back the curtain and show the world what hid behind it. Epilogue. Far from the noise and headlines, in a sleepy coastal town where boats rocked gently in the morning, tide and gulls cried into the grey sky, a local fisherman swore he saw a familiar face. He was weathered and quiet, with sun-bleached hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and forgotten even more. The man didn't give a name, just said he used to work for the government, but not the kind that helped people. They sat on an old bench by the shore. The man talked about illusions, how deep they ran, how much they cost to break. People think truth is light, he said, voice barely above the wind, but it burns just as easily. At dawn, the stranger was gone. The fisherman found only a small, battered flash drive on the bench, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth. No note, no explanation. Was it really Thomas Keane? No one knows for sure, but if it was, he seemed to have chosen a life away from cameras and rallies, a ghost wandering the edges of a world he once cracked open. He left the truth behind and trusted others to carry it forward. Public faith in major institutions never fully recovered. Some clung to anger, some to hope. The idea of transparency became a rallying cry and a bitter joke, depending on who you asked. Online forums lit up with new theories, some wild, some chillingly plausible. Did the Watchers just go deeper underground? Were they planning another deception, a bigger one? But for now at least, the biggest lie of the century had been pulled into the light. The name Black Dust became more than just a code or a scandal. It became a symbol of truth, of defiance, of what happens when one person refuses to stay silent. And in that final silence, that breathless pause between horror and hope, the last message lingered. They used fear to shape the world. But one day, fear lost. Truth didn't whisper, it roared. And the illusions that once darkened the sky shattered like glass, all in a single day. The world didn't end when the truth came out. There were no riots in the streets, at least not immediately. No apocalyptic collapse of governments, no midnight resignations broadcast across all channels. There was only a strange, simmering quiet, like the air after a thunderstorm. People didn't scream, they stared. In homes, cafes, subways, and silent offices, screens flickered as the last video from the Saturn files played. A patchy recording of a man, rumoured to be Thomas Keane, calmly laying out the framework of the greatest deception of modern history. No flashing graphics, no dramatic music, just facts, layered carefully, like bricks in a wall that once shielded something terrifying. At first, disbelief was the only reaction. How could they have pulled it off for so long? The conspiracy had threads running through military budgets, weather experiments, false flag operations, and years of faked technological limitations. It pointed to staged conflicts, compromised journalists, and a silent war waged not with bullets, but with information and fear. Then came the anger, not rage in the streets, not yet, but small personal eruptions, broken TVs, parents questioning their children's education, soldiers walking away from bases, government employees shredding badges, the kind of slow-burn fury that tears at the seams of order, not with fire, but with mistrust. The leak had forced people to see the world not as it was, but as it had been manipulated to appear. They questioned their pasts, their memories, their news. Every source that once seemed safe was now a potential mouthpiece. Every smiling anchor might have known. Every neatly typed headline felt retroactively sinister. But what stunned people the most wasn't the grandness of the conspiracy. It was how ordinary the lies were. Simple lies, repeated until they became truth, hidden in bureaucracy, cloaked in jargon, buried in classification. There was no magic, just meticulous planning. The truth hadn't been hidden by shadowy figures in dark rooms. It had been slowly erased, one file at a time, while the world looked the other way. Some institutions scrambled to recover. Task forces were created, hearings were held, committees promised oversight. But no amount of legislation could restore what had been lost. The public's belief that someone, somewhere, was truly in control for the right reasons. But let's be honest. Not everyone wanted to know the truth. For many, it was easier to doubt the leak than to live in the world it revealed. Some called Keane a fraud, a mentally unstable former contractor. Others claimed the entire dump was planted by foreign actors. They pointed out inconsistencies, missing timestamps, or corrupted metadata. But deep down, they weren't trying to debunk the truth. They were begging for a reason not to believe it. That was the final victory of the system the Saturn files exposed. It had conditioned people to reject the truth even when it stood right in front of them. And still, some tried to move forward. Journalists, who had once been complicit, now risked everything to chase buried stories. A new generation of whistleblowers emerged, young, angry, and unafraid. Former agents penned memoirs or disappeared into anonymity. Universities overhauled ethics courses. Trust became a currency more valuable than gold. But trust, once broken, doesn't regrow easily. In cities across the globe, murals appeared on concrete walls, stylized images of keyboards, shattered surveillance cameras, and the phrase, "truth, costs everything." Artists painted over old propaganda with symbols of resistance. Activists created decentralized platforms to ensure leaks could never again be buried. Encryption became a language of its own. But behind all that, beneath the protests and data dumps, the world felt haunted, like someone had turned on the lights in a long-abandoned house. And now everyone was seeing the dust, the cobwebs, and the things crawling in the corners. And Thomas Keane, he was never officially found. After the flash drive incident by the shore, rumors exploded. He was spotted in Uruguay, then in a mountain town in Nepal. Someone claimed he died in a car crash under a different name. Others believed he was taken, out by the very people he exposed. But nothing was ever confirmed. In the absence of facts, he became folklore. Some say he's still out there, watching, waiting for the world to fully wake up. A ghost in the digital machine, a guardian of truth. Others say he broke, unable to live with what he'd unleashed, that he chose to vanish to prevent becoming the very symbol the system could twist against itself. But everyone agrees on one thing: the world is not the same without him. Because once you see the machinery behind the curtain, you can't unsee it. You can't return to the comfort of illusions. The veil has been torn, and even if governments try to sew it back together, there's always going to be a hole, right in the middle, where Keane stood. And so, life continues. But it's a different kind of life. One where questions matter more than answers. Where certainty is suspect. Where citizens watch the watchers, and nothing is taken at face value. The truth, once dragged out of the shadows, now lives in the light, and it burns. In quiet cafes, people whisper about Project Halcyon and the Red File. On encrypted message boards, new threads dissect satellite images and anonymous drops. Parents warn their children to question everything, even them. And somewhere, far from cameras and Wi-Fi signals, a man who once shook the world might be staring at the ocean, wondering if it was worth it. Was it? He gave up everything, identity, safety, maybe even his sanity, to tear down a wall of lies. But what's left in the rubble? A public too afraid to believe, a truth too painful to absorb. He once said in his last recording, "The truth isn't something you're given, it's something you must survive." Maybe that's all this ever was. Not a victory, not a revolution, but survival. The survival of reality in a world engineered to bury it. Final entry. A personal account. I used to think conspiracy theorists were crazy. I laughed at forums, rolled my eyes at documentaries, ignored the rabbit holes. I believed in the strength of systems, in facts vetted by experts, in the clean, structured lines of the world as it had always been taught to me. Then the Saturn files exploded, and my belief system shattered like a glass house under artillery fire. I watched friends delete social media overnight. I saw journalists cry during live broadcasts, admitting they'd been silenced. I saw men in suits lose everything in seconds when their emails were made public. I saw good people try to justify the unforgivable, and worst of all, I saw myself, every lie I'd swallowed, every truth I'd ignored. I had been complicit too. We all were. Not through malice, but through comfort. We wanted the world to be simple, clean, and fair. But it wasn't. It never was. Now I keep 2 phones, one for the world, one for the truth. I encrypt everything. I verify everything. I don't trust institutions. I don't trust revolutions either. I trust signals, patterns, human behavior. And when something doesn't feel right, I pull the thread until the whole damn thing unravels. Because I learned one thing from all of this. The truth doesn't care if it makes you uncomfortable. It's still the truth. And if we don't chase it, no matter how deep it's buried, then we deserve the illusions that enslave us. Wherever you are, Thomas, thank you. Not because you saved the world. You didn't. But because you gave us the chance to save ourselves. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.